Faites l'appel, s'il vous plaît, Monsieur le greffier.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Hélier. Madame le connétable de Saint-Laurent.
Présente.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Brédard.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de la Trinité.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Pierre.
Présent.
Madame le connétable de Saint-Martin.
Présente.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Jean.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Clément. Monsieur le connétable de Grouville.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Ouen.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Sainte-Marie.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Sauveur.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Southern.
Présent.
Madame le député Labby. Monsieur le député Tadier.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Luce.
Présent.
Madame le député Dublé. Monsieur le député Morel.
Présent.
Madame le député Behegera.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Ayer.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Ward.
Présent.
Madame le député Alves.
Présente.
Madame le député Gardner.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Gorst.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Farnham.
Présent.
Madame le député Moore.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Mezek.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Ozouf.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Balash.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Coles.
Présent.
Madame le député Poré. Monsieur le député Ward.
Présent.
Madame le député Miles.
Présente.
Madame le député Scott.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Renouf.
Présent.
Madame le député Curtis. Madame le député Feltham. Madame le député Binet.
Présente.
Madame le député Jeune. Madame le député Miller.
Présente.
Madame le député Howell.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Binet. Monsieur le député Ferry.
Présent.
Madame le député Kovac. Monsieur le député Curtis. Madame le député Ward.
Présente.
Madame le député Wilson.
Présente.
Madame le député Stevenson.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Andrews.
Monsieur le doyen.
Notre aide soit au nom de Dieu qui a fait les cieux et la terre. Amen. Seigneur Dieu Père éternel et tout-puissant, qui a établi le gouvernement et les puissances de la terre, pour le règlement et pour la conduite du peuple, et qui nous a commandé d'avoir toujours pour but la gloire de ton saint nom. Nous te prions qu'il te plaise de donner à cette assemblée le don de conseil et de prudence, d'unir les cœurs et les affections de tous ceux qui la composent, de la conduire tellement, toi-même par ton Saint-Esprit, que toute leur délibération est accompagnée de ta bénédiction. Réussisse au bien et au soulagement du peuple, qu'il te plut de commettre à le soin. Car nous t'en prions au nom et par le mérite de ton Fils bien-aimé Jésus-Christ, notre Seigneur, qui nous a enseigné à t'invoquer en disant: Notre Père, qui es aux cieux, ton nom soit sanctifié, ton règne vienne, ta volonté soit faite sur la terre comme au ciel. Donne-nous aujourd'hui notre pain quotidien, et nous pardonne nos offenses, comme nous pardonnons à ceux qui nous ont offensés. Et ne nous envoie pas en tentation, mais délivre-nous du mal. Car à toi le règne, la puissance et la gloire, au siècle des siècles. Amen.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Clément.
So the connétable is at a hospital appointment and he will be in either present in the assembly or online after the appointment to the hospital.
Do you want him marked excuse? And
So
then
if he can be excused, yes,
members
please.
content to mark the connétable excuse? Excuse.
Thank you.
Madame le député Labby.
Defo.
Madame le député Dublé.
So Deputy Dubley is away on State's business on CWP conference in Edinburgh. She's coming back today, I assume.
State's business.
Madame le député Feltham.
Present.
Madame le Député Jeune.
Sir, Deputy Jean is also on the same conference as Deputy Doublé, States Business.
Thank you. States business.
Madame le Député Kovac.
Présente.
Les états sont constitués. Members will have seen from the supplemental order paper that there will now be a personal statement from Deputy Ozouf. Deputy Ozouf.
Thank you, sir. I'm grateful for leave to give it. Sir, I wish to make this personal statement and to offer a sincere and unreserved apology to this Assembly, to my constituents and the people of Jersey. I recently appeared before the Magistrates' Court in relation to a speeding offence. Unfortunately, there was a missed opportunity to have resolved the matter through the Parish Hall inquiry system, an appointment which I failed to attend. As a result, the case proceeded to court. The subsequent appearance of an elected member before the Magistrates' Court has understandably attracted public attention and caused embarrassment. I gave a full apology to the Magistrates' Court, as should have been the case, as this matter should not have occurred. It was the result of an administrative oversight on my part, for which I take full responsibility. Members will recall that these events have coincided with the anniversary in February 2023 of a series of profoundly difficult events which changed my life dramatically. Since then, I've also come to a clearer understanding of how certain long-standing challenges that affected my ability to manage the pressures and administrative demands of public life. I now much more am able to recognise what is required to navigate life with the structure and clarity that public responsibilities demand. I have been able, upon advice, to secure the additional support and guidance necessary to avoid falling short of the standards required. I regret that at times I have not been able to serve as effectively as I would wish. I will continue to actively put in place the required support and systems needed to meet the necessarily high standards and public expectations of elected office as a deputy in the future. This apology, sir, is made without reservation, and it is my sincere hope that I may continue to serve this Assembly and the parishioners of St Saviour with focus and commitment for the remaining of this term. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy Ozouf. Deputy Porre, your light was on.
Yes, thank you, sir. May I just inform and ask the Assembly if I can be excused at 10 o'clock? I'm accompanying a member of my family to the hospital for a serious appointment, but I'll be back as soon as possible.
Yes, of course.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
We now return to the debate on the first amendment to the proposition, and the next person to speak is indeed Deputy Ozouf.
You've taken me slightly by surprise.
Yes, I thought I might do. You
so
were the next person to speak.
Yes, I know, sir. Thank you. Can you just give me one...
So, whilst
I
Deputy
beg your
Ozouf's
pardon,
setting
sir.
up, could I ask for the defo to be raised on Deputy Labby, please?
Can defo to be raised? The defo is raised.
So you rightly called me because I had got some prepared remarks which I wanted to speak about this proposition. I'm not going to rise in to speak in every single one of the issues that are the part of the amendments. And I want to say that I have a view about this particular amendment that seeks to remove constables as in the context of the basically the context of a referendum. I have been a deputy of St Helier. I've been a senator. I do not think the parish system is on life support. I think, to be clear to members, this Assembly has, in my view, sir, no mandate to rewrite the electoral system, especially not, and what I understand and would be grateful for the chair of PPC or for the Attorney General or whoever to explain what the steps are that are going to be the next steps if this Assembly passes all these amendments and an amended proposition, because it's not the end of the day, it's not the end of the process, sir. Members of the public who are listening to this debate might believe that somehow we're going to magically get senators or remove constables or whatever. It's not. It's got to go to primary law. So in 2013, we held a referendum with 3 options. I think that islanders voted for a, yes, using the transferable vote system, option B, deputies and constituencies and constables, emerged as the winning referendum result. After that, they didn't vote for option A for the status quo. And yet the outcome was, as members will recall, not properly implemented. Years of selective interpretation followed, ultimately abolishing the senators, which is the subject of this amendment, altogether. But in 2014, sir, there was another referendum held, and I referred to that earlier, that Conitobs, and there was discussion yesterday about what the percentages were. And I did have them, but they're in my notes. But what was said, yes, there was only a 26% turnout. It wasn't done at a general election, as I recall. Voter turnout has been a real problem in Jersey for many years. But despite the turnout of 26%, the result was clear. It was 62% in favour of constables, as I recall. And this Assembly chose, on that occasion, to honour that result. Referendums aren't binding. And I ask, sir, in this amendment, what are we doing? Are we actually simply deciding in a, outside observers would say, a reckless, disrespectful way to the public in breach of international standards, which is something that's often spoken about in this Assembly? We pick and choose international standards, sir. I don't think we pick and choose international standards in terms of democracy. I don't think that we pick and choose the fact that, and I've been one of this Assembly's by the Francophonie, statement tomorrow by the President of the Assemblée Parlementaire de la Francophonie. I was, I think, one of the only members who's been an election observer for the Francophonie, and I've done it for the Commonwealth. And there was a common standard international, sir, that you shouldn't make changes by law to your electoral system 12 months before. It's looked at negatively. And certainly you should not throw out a firm of elected members that are in this Assembly, and I know there's views on either side of the debate, but we've had a referendum, and it should be stuck to. And if we're going to throw out the constables, sir, we need a referendum to remove them, I would suggest, because you can't have it both ways. There has been lots of discussion about the makeup of this Assembly. I think seeking to remove constables, abolishing, as this amendment is about removing constables without a referendum, does not have proper consultation. The consultation around the parish halls was not about removing constables, it was about the reintroduction of senators. But was that really public consultation? I've done consultation in my constituency of St Saviour, a microcosm of Jersey, and I think members want, the people that I've spoken to actually want us to get on with the issues that we're here to actually do, not talk about, as many people will say, ourselves, whether that be deputies, constables or senators. My late father was a constable. I've been a deputy in 2 parishes and I've been a senator. So I don't know anything really, but I know something. And I know about election observers. And I know that that Venice Convention of Good Practice is something that we should choose voluntarily to comply with. The golden rule in democratic systems, you do not move the goalposts during the match or even just before it. And just before it is 12 months, sir. It's not about whether we like the current system or not. It is about trust. It is about stability and legitimacy. And we're really going to the heart of that. That's why it's primary law, sir. It's really important. It needs to be approved by the Privy Council. If we want to change our electoral system, sir, let's do it properly, with full public consultation, independent advice, and a binding referendum if it's been decided previously to have an elected member as part of it, which the constables have. Anything less, I think, would be regarded as democratic malpractice. Call it all sorts of adjectives, some of which are not parliamentary. But the constables has been a settled conclusion, not in 1, but in 2 referendums, sir. And I maintain that this amendment should not be adopted. And I won't be repeating some of these remarks in some of the other amendments debates, because I do perhaps speak too much, and I've used 5 minutes, 6 minutes of my speech, and I oppose this amendment as I oppose others, and I oppose other amendments without repeating myself on the view of international standards needing to be respected, because we do have international elected observers as a member of the Commonwealth and the Francophonie, sir, and that should be celebrated and respected. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. First thing this morning, about 4 lights did go on, but I only got down 2 names, and those were Deputy Miles and the Constable St John. So if I didn't get you then, I'll put down your names now. Thank you very much. Deputy Miles.
Thank you, sir. When I stood for election, I made manifesto commitments to support the retention of the Constable as members of the states and to support the reintroduction of senators. And in accordance with that latter commitment, I have voted for the last 2 propositions that sought to reinstate senators. I will remain true to my commitments in both respects throughout this debate. Some members may know that I have an academic interest in informal systems of justice and asset-based community development, and this interest leads me to the focus of my speech on this amendment. Despite the small geographical area of our island, rather than becoming a single island-wide community, Jersey developed very unusually, and as an island comprising 12 separate little bubbles of governance, each having considerable discretion to shape and control events that take place between parish boundaries. It might be unusual, but I can say so with great affection. It is Jersey. It is what makes us special. The 12 parish structure is of vital importance to our island, and it served us well for hundreds of years, at least since the 12th century. The Constables have sat in the States from its inception, and as it has emerged as a body in its own right, long before the introduction of the deputy or the senator. They bring a direct link between parishes and the Assembly, ensuring that grassroots issues can be raised in a timely and effective way through questions and debates. The role of the parish as the primary unit of social organisation administration in Jersey makes us very different to other communities. Other places would love to have the type of communitarian structure that we have here: honorary policing, parish hall inquiries, local people dealing with local issues at local level. Indeed, other places are spending a great deal of money to recreate these structures, the structures that we have had here and have served us well for centuries. I think we need to be very careful what we wish for. We don't know if removing the Constable from the States will have unintended consequences on the social organisation and administration. We don't know how parishioners will react. Or perhaps we do. The last referendum was very clear on that subject. We don't know how the Constable's removal would affect the delivery of key government strategies and policies. We don't know whether it would change the way in which government engages and interacts with the parish. Would they become sidelined in a way that isn't possible when the Constable can raise issues in this Assembly? We don't know how the administrative functions currently being delivered by the parishes would be affected. Will it cost the ratepayer more? We don't know if this would be the end of the parish system. Parishes do rely on that link with the states. It is fundamental. And whether or not members feel it would be the end, it would certainly be another nail. The Carswell Review in 2010 recommended that the Constable should not hold ministerial positions, suggesting that their responsibilities could create conflicts of interest. That is a debate for another day. We've seen the influx of alleged expertise from other jurisdictions, the Venice Commission, the CPA observers. All of these ideas garnered from fleeting visits or desktop research that risks undermining our local practices and traditional values and makes our system seem antiquated and outmoded. Our parish system is none of these things. And as the head of the parish, the Constable is able to participate fully in the State's Assembly, which is an asset to parishioners. It is a symbiotic relationship, a reciprocal one, a mutual one. Just because a system is ancient, it doesn't mean it's archaic. Tradition and adaptability can be a powerful combination. Last week, I announced that I was chairing a scrutiny review to examine all of these aspects of the relationship between the parishes and the government. And at the end of that review, we'll have a better understanding of that relationship as it stands today, and an up-to-date body of evidence upon which we can make proper, reasoned and informed decisions about the role of the Constable in the Assembly. Currently, All we have is anecdote and supposition that nothing would change as a result of this amendment. I do not believe that that is the case. So at this point in time, and especially when reflecting on the referendum result in 2014, I will not be supporting this amendment. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Conatawa St John.
Thank you, sir. I'm not sure how to follow previous speakers. I thought it was an excellent speech by my colleague. Sir, whilst I'm generally undecided on how to vote for the main proposition, I'm more than happy to contribute to this part of the debate. So I was somewhat surprised last week to be asked by a colleague on these benches if I'd be supporting the retention of the Conatable in the States. So on Monday evening, I looked back at the Jersey Evening Post from the 22nd of April 2013, the eve of the A, B and C referendum. And I'd like to quote extracts from a letter published in that paper under the headline, "The Constable Provides a Vital Link." The letter talks about the importance to retain a voice for each parish and preserve the vital link between the parish and the State's Chamber. The letter went on to suggest that it's a vital link between parishes and government that is essential for an efficient Ireland. As long as constables retain their seats, the State's departments will have to work with them. Once this link is lost, it will lead to further duplication and ultimately additional costs to the tax and ratepayer. The letter goes on to congratulate the 10 brave constables who, having listened to the debates and considered the options on the table, have demonstrated once again good leadership, a willingness to adopt change and putting the Ireland first, just the type of states members the Ireland needs. Sir, the author of that letter now stands here before you in this assembly. Sir, I wrote about the impact on efficiency, and I can certainly identify efficiency improvement opportunities, so I very much welcome Deputy Miles's review into the parish system and its relationship with government. Sir, as a constable, we are very well placed and extremely accessible to represent the views of the community. As Deputy Mezek so eloquently spoke about yesterday afternoon about the island's wish to have their direct parish representation. Not only are we heads of our respective municipalities, we are also invited to support many organisations in our parishes, ranging from mother and toddler groups, youth projects, sports clubs, through to senior citizen groups and care homes, and everything in between. In St John, sir, in addition to the traditional parish groups, we also have an elected group that considers planning matters, elected for 3 years at a parish assembly, and that group, sir, have been praised for the submissions they've contributed to the last Island Plan and the more recent Bridging Island Plan. That group consulted widely with St John parishioners, and the outputs of their work helped to inform the way I voted based on the results of the questionnaires sent to all parish homes. I should say that the Conatable St John holds an ex officio position on the Committee Rural and does not chair that group. Sir, we also have a climate group who again keep me on my toes when it comes to environmental matters. Sir, to date I have supported the district approach as I believe it has strengths. When people approach me about various subjects, if I can't help them, I can often point them in the direction of one of the 4 deputies who may have more experience than I in a certain area. The proposer of the main proposition spoke about the need for a wider perspective. I'm happy to tell the Deputy and others that when I've canvassed, my views, and I'm sure all other constables' candidates' views, have been questioned on an extremely wide range of topics. Yes, people want to know about parochial issues, but they generally want to know about island issues as much, if not more. Sir, I hold a weekly surgery and have on average 4 or 5 different people who attend every week. We discuss a whole range of topics. Sometimes we have to agree to disagree, but whatever my view or theirs, in the main, we go away more informed. The general consensus on this subject is that people, generally the more senior members of our community, want to see an island-wide mandate, but not at the expense of the role of Conatable. My research isn't restricted to just those who make the effort to come and see me. I've spoken to dozens of people, and not only in St John, but from around the island on this matter. Like Deputy Miller, I also received a hard copy of a petition from residents of St John and 2 other parishes. Sir, the common threads are, why are you once again talking about yourselves? Why don't you let the current system bed in? When discussing the need to improve voter turnout and how further changes might lead to more people voting, I've been asked the following. Change the day of the elections. Well, that's successful, hopefully, and allow people to vote in any allocation and also improve the location of your polling stations. Sir, Deputy Ozouf spoke about the referendum. Having been involved in, shall I say, a few campaigns, I can categorically say that the public who voted in that referendum, regardless of their view, were disappointed with this Assembly for not implementing the results when they had the chance. Finally, sir, on a recent visit to Guernsey, I discussed their model with members of the Assembly who I've known in a couple of cases for many years. Their observations was it was a mistake to lose local parochial representation. Sir, I respectfully ask members to vote against the amendment brought by Deputy Coles. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conor. Conor St Martin.
Thank you, sir. I would like to start by thanking Deputy Coles for giving us 2 weeks, or just 2 weeks, to consider removing almost 600 years of Jersey's history as an act of compromise. 500 years plus of a position working well for the island could be wiped out with a last-minute amendment. I would also like to make it known that this compromise is to support restoring a position the proposer's party agreed to remove in the last Assembly, and Reform has repeatedly opposed this until this month. I'm talking about the Senators. Of all the political issues we face in this Assembly, I'm surprised that this is the one that has led to Reform's Damascene conversion. It will come as absolutely no surprise that I am opposed to this amendment, both as a connoisseur and as an islander. I'm opposed because this amendment will have a negative impact on the quality of representation that islanders receive. The Constable has a role to play in this Assembly because they are not only a direct link between central governance and municipal life, but because they can provide insights and take initiatives directly from the municipality that deputies are unable to. It may have been suggested that the Constable could seek election as a deputy, but I do not see this as offering any improvement on where we are now. There is direct democracy at parish level. Connotabs are very present in their parishes, and as elected representatives, we see our parishioners, constituents on a daily basis. The Rates Assembly is a good example of direct democracy. Parishioners can attend and vote on how the rate will be set for the year. What other jurisdictions are there where taxes can be directly voted on? Remove the constables, and somebody said to me, remove the constables at your peril. If we begin to centralise, rates will go up. And if you start losing municipality and the honorary police through feeling disenfranchised, costs will escalate and the goodwill of the community will suffer, along with rising costs to replace those vital services. At the core of these debates on the constables is the question of whether they can provide a type of representation that can overcome the mathematical issues they create through the persistence of historical parish boundaries. I still believe that we need to keep the constables in, because no other legislature successfully offers that unique connection between a small island's government and its municipalities. It allows us to share insights of what we see going on in the parish, not just cultural events, but the issues faced by the very poorest in our parishes and what we do to help them. We see things that deputies are not required to see, that they can opt out of. In theory, a deputy can be elected and then never see their constituents again until the next election, and I'm totally not suggesting that this happens. For a constable, it is our daily purpose to engage with parishioners and solve their problems, and that is what informs our politics. You will not get that same devotion to community with the senators. We become constables because of our sense of social justice. Our presence in the States Assembly may be atypical of the Westminster parliamentary model, but it serves us well. And contrary to a mistaken belief by some that we are insular in our parishes, no, we look outwards and we see the whole picture. For example, there is a huge ongoing piece of work being carried out by the Home Affairs Minister in this government. It is a piece of work that they are very proud of. This monumental and important piece of work, of which I'm referring, is implementing the recommendations on violence against women and girls. Sir, I am also extremely proud of this body of work because it was me who brought it to the Assembly as an independent member, a non-executive member and a constable. With the way women are being marginalised around the world and now even in the USA, this work is outward looking, not just for the whole island but globally. Yes, this was brought by a constable and I have brought other successful island-wide propositions. The Assembly needs to consider what effect removing the constables would have on representation in Jersey. As I've already said, if you lose the constables, you lose a key thread between the Government of Jersey and parish and municipal governance. You lose opportunities to prevent it being cut back by austerity or absorbed into a system it is not designed for. And you lose opportunities to help people and build their local economies because a parish is more nimble than the Government of Jersey. It really is. In St Martin, through obtaining a loan to redevelop and refurbish our old primary school whilst maintaining the historic facade and building, in the last 5 years we have fiscally stimulated the economy, developing and providing work in our doctor's surgery, pharmacy, vets, the medical supply shop and showroom, and our M&S store. This supermarket is the highest grossing M&S per square foot in the world. All this is a great achievement for a rural parish. And this initiative has been developed through the hard work of the Conotab and the parish. It may also be worth considering whether the constables under the Assembly's current composition are not so much a hindrance for districts, but rather a backstop. You need a minimum number of deputies in this Assembly to ensure equal representation within an electoral system that retains parish boundaries. Remove the constables, and although you may gain the freedom for a more targeted equity, you also lose the need to meet this criteria. A future Assembly, heated up on those ideas of minimising bureaucracy we see across the pond, could start to reduce the number of members with much greater efficiency without the issue of constables. If, like me, you value the high level of elected representation islanders receive, then you should keep us. Turning to the amendments report, where the deputy suggests that removing the position of constable from the Assembly would allow us to either focus purely on their parochial duties or seek election. I would appreciate it if the deputy could confirm in his closing speech whether he believes the constables at St Helier or St Peter or St John or St Brillard have been hampered in their assistant ministerial or ministerial duties by virtue of being constables. Have I been able to deliver the vast agenda of PPCs by being hampered by being both a constable of St Martin and the chair of PPC? We have heard this argument time and time again, but it is facetious. Anyone who has been or shadowed constable knows that we put in the hours needed to effectively serve our parishes and in the Assembly, and in some cases the Government of Jersey, and we do not suffer as a result. Sir, we choose to take on the dual role and we see it as a privilege. I've invited some deputies in Reform and others to come to St Martin and see what I do on a daily basis. Unfortunately, only one member has taken up the offer, and they can see what's been achieved. I extend this invitation again to everyone here and now, and invite the proposer and others to see what can be achieved. For example, the Levier École, which is our retail doctors and vets facility, and the playgrounds and the first-time buyer homes, achieved without government funding. Getting things done in parishes can be achieved so much faster than government achieves them, but I could not achieve these things if I was not a serving states member. In Reform's last manifesto, there was a promise of developing an elected municipal council in St Helier. I obviously cannot speak for St Helier, but I am aware that the sheer difference in population and size provides islanders with a very different experience of engaging with their parishes. So it is a shame that ditching the constables is the most that the deputy can contribute to this order paper. Turning to turnout, where concerns around how low it is, are very correct, and something that this Assembly takes seriously, and as Chair PPC, I take it very seriously. Members would also do well to note that the lack of historical contest for the role of constable. That is why I introduced the none of the above, none of the candidates ballot option in the previous assembly. This gave islanders a chance, for the first time ever, to reject an uncontested candidate. And guess what? Islanders accepted it and cast their ballots. Most of us were very fortunate to be returned with a strong, high mandate, a couple of others less so. Nonetheless, what we now have is proof that we as constables are not invincible. We can be beaten at the polls, and I hope that this is what encourages islanders to contest these positions next year. I believe this information, indeed the overall volatility of the previous election, will be considerably more influential in encouraging islanders to stand, compared to tinkering once again with a system we've been arguing over for years without asking islanders what they want. If you get rid of the constables, the turnout may go even lower. We have seen constable elections in Guernsey, when they did remove them from the states of deliberation, with a turnout of under 4%. Is this Assembly willing to risk this? Turning to the hypothetical of the constables being removed, I note that the Deputy's report suggests that if constables are to be remunerated for the position, then it would be for the parish to consider. The Deputy would do well to understand that being a constable is a full-time responsibility that extends well past ordinary working hours, and we are paid through the Assembly. We would need more time than 14 months that we have to organise an effective system to resolve this. To remunerate constables through the parish would either mean higher rates or severe cuts to parish services. Which of the two would the Deputy like to tell the public he favours? The third option would be not to pay constables at all. In past years, Deputy Mezek has proudly spoken about former Deputy Norman Le Broc. When I was so much younger than I am today, I met Deputy Le Broc. Deputy Le Broc spent years campaigning alongside other members of the Jersey Democratic Movement for a proper wage for states members so that working people, not just the wealthy, could sit in this Assembly. The establishment of a wage for constables comes through this Assembly, and setting everything else aside, I cannot have this position removed without a proper plan in place. If there's no other reason for members to reject this amendment, then let it be this one: to turn an elected post, one that is at the heart of the island's culture and responsible for, in my case, a budget of roughly £1 million a year, into the hobby of the wealthy, is not social democracy. It is not social democracy at all, just the opposite. I'm content for Deputy Coles to remain unaware of what constables do, but the parishes and islanders should not be impinged as a result. Before I conclude, I would like to pick up on the Deputy's suggestion that divisive and consequential political issues are more likely to inspire interest than bland and soulless explanations on how a system works. I would challenge him to find a constable who will give you a bland and soulless lecture on how the system works. We can be a fervently spirited bunch, but I may not always look like it. To close, the proposer may note that the title of his party is Reform, not Revolution. And as I've said, the constables are already changing. Hopefully voters know and have the proof that we're more than able to contribute to this Assembly as easily and as effectively as any deputy, and for the sake of clarity, any senator, if that role is indeed brought back in. Having served under the previous electoral system and under the new one, I can happily say that the debates we have had in this Assembly is not the two-tier perception of before. It is so much more equal. To be clear, we welcome contested elections. We want a diversity of voices, a diversity of people challenging on election day, and we want the public to know that it is possible, as we have shown, to be elected as constable, to build change and make a real difference. The States Assembly may be our parliament, but the life of the islands is within the parish. The Assembly is meant to pride itself on careful, evidence-based decision-making. Removing the constables would be the opposite. If the Deputy wants to move forwards, then we need to let the future come to us by allowing islanders to contest these positions as mandates within the States Assembly. I urge members to please reject this amendment.
Point of order, sir, if I may.
Point of order, yes.
The Constable made reference that this is my only contribution to this order paper. However, I have an oral question on this order paper, plus another proposition submitted on this oral paper. So I believe
point of order. You're not seeking a ruling from the chair. That's not.
Well, I believe that the member has then misled the Assembly by providing misinformation, sir.
You'll make a speech in due course in relation to.
So I think it can be considered a point of order in the sense that.
Well, it was an invitation to give way would have been more appropriate.
You can confirm how many items Deputy Coles has on the order paper and correct the Speaker if she's wrong, I think.
Yeah, sorry, can I apologise? I meant to say the only proposition, sorry, and I missed that out when I was speaking. Sorry, I do apologise, and I know you contribute widely to the chamber.
Thank you very much. Constable St Peter.
Thank you, sir. The amendment to the proposition seeks to remove the constables from the Assembly, should we agree that senators are to return. There is no indication that the public have requested the removal of the constables, as the results of the referendum in both 2013 and 2014 do not support or request such a change. Voter equality and the Venice Commission are often relied upon by those seeking the removal of the constables from the Assembly. The Venice Commission is an advisory body of the Council of Europe, composed of independent experts in the field of constitutional law. It was created in the 1990s after the fall of the Berlin Wall, at a time when there was an urgent need for constitutional assistance in Central and Eastern Europe. It is interesting that the EU have now encountered problems with some of the recommendations of the Venice Commission and have changed their view on certain issues, in particular that of equality of representation across the electoral districts. Perhaps when setting up the Venice Commission, they had not anticipated the number of smaller nations who wished to join the EU. Of course, they were only willing to join if they felt they had a voice and could not be bullied by the larger nations. The Treaty of Lisbon, signed by all EU countries in 2007, 17 years after the Venice Commission was formed, provide for the number of MEPs in the EU to be digressively proportional to the number of citizens of each member state. There is a clear parallel between our parishes and the different sizes of countries in the EU. This would say that St Mary's should have a representative, although its numbers would not necessarily pass a pure equal vote test. You could view each constable as a representative of the community. In fact, that is what they are. They represent the municipality and can be held to account by 10 parishioners requesting a parish assembly if they're unhappy either with the constable's administration of the parish or his performance in the state's assembly. That is true democracy. As such, the constable is the person best placed to know what impact proposed legislation would have locally and his position in his parish and his position in the states provide that essential link between parish and state's administration. The EU has recognised the issue of voter equality and has addressed it. It allows smaller nations a greater number of representatives per their total population than the larger nations, in effect flying in the face of the recommendations of the Venice Commission that was set up in the 1990s. Switzerland, likewise, allows 2 representatives in the Federal Council of the States for each of the cantons. However, the cantons range between 100,000 and 1 million voters. Any attempt to undertake constitutional change requires both a majority vote of the Council of States and a public referendum, something that we should consider. Turning to the sorry, sir. I've researched I have obviously researched where where voter equality has been questioned, and if the EU questions voter equality, then why are we trying to, in a small jurisdiction of 45 square miles, trying to introduce pure voter equality? I would therefore ask members to reject this amendment. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conatable. Deputy Taddeo.
Thank you, sir. So let's just recontextualise this debate. We are here today not because reform instigated a debate on electoral reform. Our position overall is very clear that we should not tinker with the system 12 months before an election, and we've already debated this issue. Is it twice or three times, sir? I lose count. And it's been roundly rejected, especially on the last time. Twice. This is the third time. And so the Assembly has spoken on this. It's been well soundly rejected. And also, we tend to hear from certain parts of the Assembly that we shouldn't keep re-debating issues that have already been put to bed. And how often do we hear that? Often from the same people who are maybe bringing these amendments and supporting this today. So that's the context of the debate. The second point is that Deputy Miller should be biting our hand off to accept this amendment, because it means it's the only way that she could bring on board the 10 votes that are on offer from the largest party in this Assembly, a party which is also a party of government. And it leads me to question, actually, whether or not she is serious about wanting to bring back senators, or whether simply, because if one were serious about wanting to bring back the island-wide mandate, you would seek to build consensus within the Assembly and find a way that is acceptable for a significant number of members, not just perhaps a slim majority of 25, 26, to be able to force this through. Perhaps that's her intention. Because we've said all along, actually, our manifesto commitment, and we were elected on a clear manifesto commitment that there should be electoral reform at some point and that there should be ideally one type of states member. We're open to what that one type of states member should be. We're also ultimately believe in a fair system. And we'll go back to the point about fair systems and first principles during this speech, because I think those are the basics. And if we don't get the basics right, then of course everybody can pull out 49 plus permutations of what we might wish to be. And if you extend that across the island, those ideas could, of course, be in the tens of thousands of permutations about what electoral reform ultimately should look like. So I'm disappointed that Deputy Miller hasn't reached out to us, actually, and said, actually, this is a really good way of bringing back the senators. I do look over to the constables' bench, speaking through the chair, and say, constables, some of them seem to want to bring back senators. I know that for sure, maybe even more than at the last time. So there will be constables here who voted against bringing back the island-wide mandate in the last two occasions, who might, for whatever reason, be sorely tempted on this occasion to actually change their vote. Why? I don't know, but I would ask them, sir, through the chair, how committed are they to bringing the island-wide mandate back? Are they willing to bring it back? Are they willing enough to be able to give up their own seats to do that? I suspect that's when they go quiet and say, oh, we couldn't possibly give up the automatic ex officio role that we have in this Assembly. But they are asking 9 deputies, and I talk about the cohort of deputies, not any individual deputy, to give up 9 of seats on this side of the Assembly, to yield up their seats, even though the consequence of that would be to make electoral distribution even worse. And I have to address this point, because I woke up early this morning thinking about it, is that anybody who stands up and tries to fight for electoral fairness is dismissed, and this was in the initial speech of Deputy Miller, but we've heard it again in this particular amendment, as some kind of zealot. They're a mathematical zealot. These theorists who come in from elsewhere and they're fixated on numerical accuracy. No, it's actually called just the basics of democracy. And this is why it goes back to the point, when we teach our young people in the island at primary school about democracy, don't just invite them into the Assembly and tell them this is how it works, and this is where everybody sits, and this is the mace, and this is why we've got the powers. Go one step back, I would suggest, and I look over to those who are maybe charged with those areas and actually say, what are the basic tenets of democracy? Because you see, when the original proposer was moving this, she talked a lot about jurisdiction, our jurisdiction. There was no talk about our community, our society, our democracy, and how that works. Jurisdiction, it's a very legal word, it's a very legalistic word, which is perhaps unsurprising given the background of the esteemed member. But we're not in a court, we are an assembly, and the assembly's focus should be on democracy, not on jurisdiction. It should be on the basic principles of democracy. And so when we say there's been a referendum, and that's put the matter to bed, yes, there may have been a referendum. Was there a referendum on giving prisoners back the right to vote, giving some prisoners in Jersey the right to vote? No, there wasn't. If there were a referendum on it, as a betting man, am I a betting man? I'm not sure, but to use that turn of phrase, the public wouldn't have accepted that. They would have come out and roundly rejected the fact that prisoners shouldn't be able to vote. They're criminals, they're in prison for a reason, they shouldn't be given the vote. But other human rights considerations and democratic principles and norms say that it's not right to refuse certain things to certain people, and that goes for our electorate, because we are living in a democracy. Now, a lot of the arguments I've heard, it's a real shame because we've heard a real defensiveness from the constables, but we as a party have been put into a position where we've looked at what is essentially a bad proposition. It's a proposition which doesn't add anything. It takes our democracy backwards rather than forwards. And our job as a responsible political party is to look at that and say, well, how can we make what's in front of us better? How could we possibly make it better? And this is the only way we can think of to do it. And of course, it's not going to please 11 of the 12 constables, is it? And I'm not going to fall out with them over this, because I think we have to be robust and frank in this. They have been as well. But a lot of the arguments that we've heard from the constables, and I'll try and find my passage here, sir, especially from the constable of St Martin.
Deputy Scott, do you want to
Yeah, it's just that
ask
whilst
the member
Deputy,
to give way? We're going
yes,
to stand up, though.
could I ask the Deputy to give way, because I did have a question and he's looking for a bit anyway.
If the clock is stopped, I'm happy to give way.
I think the clock will stop for a point of... It has stopped.
Right, okay, yes, the
time has
question,
stopped.
I just wondered if, when he can pick up in the speech, because it's this bit about the referenda, and that it seemed that the Deputy was suggesting that we shouldn't have them, or we shouldn't respect them. I couldn't quite understand that point, so if you could explain.
Point of clarification you're seeking. Yes.
If I have time at the end of my speech, and I've not run out, so I'll happily address that point. So I was making the point about the words. So the constables made all sorts of absolutely correct comments. They say we become constables because of our sense of social justice. Great, so do we. So there's no difference there. Contrary to the idea that we are insular in our parishes, we look outwards. Great, so do we. But we still had to be elected to this assembly, specifically. The first point to say, and this is not a criticism of anyone or the role, is that constables are not elected to this assembly. They are elected to their parishes. They are ex officio members of this assembly. Therefore, they get the right to sit in this assembly, not by way of contesting an election like we've all had to do. The 37 of us on this side of the assembly have all had to face an election. We've all had to face an election in large electoral districts at the last election. And that's not the case for all of the constables. That's not their fault, but that's the system we've had. And parishioners elect constables, I would suggest, primarily and often because they say, we're going to keep the rates low. You know me, I've been in the parish for quite a while. And he's a good old boy is the kind of theme that you hear. That's fine. That's a great way to elect a constable. But if to give them a seat in our national parliament on top of that, that's a little bit strange. Especially given the fact that there's nothing to preclude them if we were to remove that ex officio role for standing for election. Now, and all those things that were said, if you change the word constable to rector, let's see how that reads. So the rectors might have been standing up here before 1948 saying, but you know, we become rectors because of our sense of justice. Contrary to the idea that we're insular in our parish, rectors look outwards. And we've got, we've got a great dean in this assembly. We've got one who I think is outward looking and is doing some great work, both for his physical parish in St Helier, what he's done with the church in St Helier, making it open to everybody of all faiths or none. It is wonderful, and I'm sure he takes that ethos into his wider constituency of the island. But the point is, the votes of the rectors were removed in 1948 because it didn't sit right. Ultimately, I don't think there's anything in electoral law that stops rectors from standing for election, but they might think that they don't really need to do those two jobs. And the point is, if the constables are so secure that the public in the island want them in this assembly, then why wouldn't they give them the option? And we haven't heard what the counterfactuals are, because we don't know who doesn't put themselves forward for election, how many parishioners are not putting themselves forward for election because they don't want to do the assembly work. This is absolutely factual. Not so long ago, I spoke to somebody who said that their father had been approached by the current constable of the parish. I won't mention who it is. That person may be able to guess, though, from what I'm about to say. I don't think it gives away any identities. To ask this person if they would consider running for constable at the next election, because that constable was going to stand down at the next election, or they think they will. And the person said, and obviously this is somebody who's been involved with the parish, presumably would have made a great constable, otherwise the current constable wouldn't be asking them. And they said, you know what, I don't want to do the States work. I'd love to be constable because I love the parish, but I'm not interested in sitting in the States debating things like this for days on end. That's just not what I'm here to do. Great. So actually, by holding on to a system where you think, members might think, constables might think that they're doing a favour to the parish system, they're actually potentially doing a great disservice to it. And it could actually be by not willing to compromise on these kind of issues that the constables are actually putting the final nails in the coffins of the parish. Those are not things that are going to be easy to hear for certain people, because I look at the constable of St Martin, and I suspect she's a very good constable in her own parish. I don't know, I don't live there, but from what I see, having been to her parish, the beautiful play park she's got in front of it, the way that her parish seems to be excellently run is great, and she's also an excellent States member, and that's why I don't think she'd have any problem when she was constable if she said, actually, you know what? I want to put my name forward for one of the deputy positions in St Martin and Groove Hill. I think that the parishioners, the constituents in those areas would probably vote for her, and she would then have an equal mandate. And so I would say to the constables, why would the constables not wish to be elected on an equal basis to this assembly in the same way that all the other members of this assembly are elected? Because then it puts beyond any doubt questions about their legitimacy. But they seem to be unwilling to do that. Maybe they don't trust the public enough to value their worth as highly as it should be valued. The thing is, I would also come back to the point that we've been led to this position, but of course, all of these amendments arguably are a suboptimal way of delivering something that might otherwise be desirable or deliverable. Because the fundamental point of this main proposition is undesirable, and this is not the way to go about things. And I would suggest, not only is it not right to try and tinker with the system 12 months before an election, for what I have to say appears to me from the outside to be little more than political gerrymandering, because what we've seen here is that there isn't a real desire to bring back the island-wide mandate. Otherwise, that conversation about how we would deliver that fairly would be on the table. For example, should we all be elected on an island-wide mandate? I think you'd probably find great support from the public for that. But that's not what we're debating today. But there is a way that this could be delivered, and it all goes back to the fact that rather than make proper change, whether it was in 1948, where we saw basically the great old Jersey fudge coming forward, is that you give it to an independent body to do the work. Because a bit like the fact that we don't set our own pay in this assembly for good reason, we have a remuneration body to do that and to look at our terms and conditions. We shouldn't be setting our own electoral districts either, because we have skin in the game, as the expression I think is in the business community, sir. So the first point is you set up a commission. Oh, that's a great idea. So what happened when we did that in 2000? The Clothier report came forward, and it's been terribly maligned, unfairly, I think, sir, because actually what Clothier had at its heart was protection of the parish system. And he said that actually, rather than having these super constituencies, which were an attempt to be a hybrid between senators and the parish link, he said actually put all of your seats into the parishes. Presumably, he didn't specify, but said you could probably have single-seat constituencies, and I would advocate for an alternative vote so you don't get rotten boroughs. And actually, you could then decide whether you want to have constables in or out, because in fact, constables can easily be taken into account on the basis of the equality and the number of parishioners. And I'll finish with this point, because this is a fundamental one about fairness, which I would say to children in schools. If you have an island, a hypothetical island, divide it straight into geographically. You have 10 people living on one side, 100 people on the other side, and you say you're both allowed to vote for 2 seats in the chamber. They will tell you very quickly that is not a fair system. And then if in the one part of the island where did I say 100 people live, they get the 2 votes, they decide not to turn out to vote after a while because they say, well, it's not really fair. And then people point out, well, actually, the people in the large part of the island with 100 residents, they're not voting, so I think we're going to take one of their seats away because they don't value democracy, and we're going to give it to the other half of the island where 10 people live. We'll give them 3 seats, and we'll give the other one 1 seat. That's exactly what we're hearing in this kind of debate. And it's absolute madness. We need to go back to first principles of democracy, because what we're seeing today is that we might have had the Great Jersey Fudge in the past, but what we're seeing now is an attempt at the Great Jersey gerrymander, possibly a great idea for TV.
Thank you, Deputy.
Sir, point of clarification? Or I think the Deputy has...
Well, do you accept to be prepared to accept a point of clarification?
So I can, but it would bring me over my 15 minutes, so I don't know where that would leave me with the
Yes,
rest in the hands of the Assembly, sir.
You can deal with that, yes.
Sir, would the Deputy clarify? I think he has accused me of having an improper motive or being dishonest in bringing this proposition, both of which I find offensive. Thank you.
Do you mean by reference to the word gerrymandering or something else?
He's suggesting that I'm not committed to the proposition and that I have I've brought the proposition knowing it is doomed to failure, and that is certainly not the case.
Well, do you want to just confirm that you're not imputing any dishonest or other?
So I don't think it's doomed to failure. No, and I don't think I imputed improper motives, but if the member can highlight that subsequently, I'm happy to clarify or withdraw comments.
Please confirm that there's no such suggestion of any motive.
I'm grateful for that, sir, but I can absolutely assure the Assembly that I have not brought this proposition with the intention of anything other than success.
Right. Yes, Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. I'm pleased to follow a number of previous speakers, and not least the connotables of St John and St Martin and Deputy Miles, because they will enable me to say a lot less in my short contribution now. And I want to just look at this from a practical point of view. I think everybody who stands up to make contributions today are doing it for the right reasons and for the reasons they believe in. Now, those reasons, we might differ on that. We might talk about tradition. We might talk about versus purpose of why we are all here versus a tradition. And we must talk about our democracy, which Deputy Miles referred to as being something quite unique that has served us well for centuries. I think there's a lot of misinformation circulating, or should we say just different ways of clarification of the variance we see in voting. And when we look, and I have all the figures here, although I was a bit ambitious when I printed the spreadsheet out this morning, my spectacles aren't powerful enough to see it all. But we see great claims of how important sort of reducing the variance in constituencies is important. But actually in the vote, we saw still saw a huge, with technically districts that have, within the Venice Commission, which is only a set of guidelines, basically, recommend a 15% variance. We've seen a massive variance with member being voted in deputies being voted in between sort of about 580 votes to somewhere close to 3,000, an enormous, we all sit here as deputies with an enormous range of votes. Our democracy is unique insofar as this, we only have this assembly. We don't have an upper house or devolved assemblies or parish council. We have parish councils, town councils, city councils. We have this assembly, which is why the balance is important. You see, the constables represent the parish, and now we have multi-parish constituencies. If we were to lose the constables, members of the public within the multi-parish constituencies wouldn't have a parish representative. They would have a constituency representative, and that is, I think, important to note. The tradition of the constables are important, but actually the purpose that they serve now in modern society, I think, is even more important. And having served as a deputy, I know the role of the deputy versus the role of the constable. And although they overlap at times, they are largely different. And if we were to lose the constables, I think that would cause irreparable damage to the parish system. It would steer all of the parishioners through to their political representatives, bypassing the parish constable, because their loss of political influence would be of significant relevance to what they could achieve, as Councillor St Martin referred to, we have seen in our sister island of Guernsey. That's all I have to say at this stage. I regrettably cannot support Deputy Cole's amendment, but I thank him for bringing it, because these debates, whilst we get criticised for talking about each other, I believe are important because they affect the democratic process of this whole island, and we are trying to put that straight today, sir. Thank you.
May I ask a point of clarification, if I may, sir?
You prepared to give way, Chief Minister? Point of clarification from Deputy Ozouf? Yes.
The latter point that the Chief Minister made was the certainty that this will present. I did ask in an earlier speech, and he referred to it, about the timing of what actually the process will be. This is not the end of it, and I'm just asking whether or not there's a subtle way of trying to ask what the timing of this actually process is, because I don't know. And if the Chief Minister could kindly address, because he's in charge of law drafting, could he kindly address that point, sir? In his clarification of his speech, when he says, do it today, it's not today, it's going to be the legislation, sir.
Yes, Chief Minister.
Well, sir, I personally didn't comment on that, because we have an amendment from the Privileges and Procedures Committee which talks about implementing this in 2030. But I know that Deputy Miller has taken sounding, sir, and I have no doubt that if we were to approve Deputy Miller's proposition or an amended version of it, I have no doubt that we have time to put the legislation in place in time for the 2026 election, sir. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak on the First Amendment? Deputy Gardner.
Thank you, sir. Several points I would like to make based on the speeches that were made before. I agree with people said that we shouldn't. This debate, it's my 5th debate over the last 5 years. I wish that we would manage over these 5 years to convince public that current system works. From Deputy Miller bringing this proposition and from going around the parishes and people approaching, we didn't do a good job convincing people out there that it does work. So something doesn't work for the public, and public feels different choice. And this is why we're debating this 5th time. What was difficult for me and why I decided to speak, it's actually, I felt an attack in some shape or form for Deputy Cole's amendment that it came out of the blue in 2 weeks' time. If I'm looking through all amendments that came in front of us, actually, Deputy Cole amendment was considered, removing what we're talking about, removing constables, was considered proper compared to any other amendments by PPC in 2019, and we actually had a vote in 2020. The vote was lost by 6 votes only, but it has been considered in the details. And if I walked back into the proposition, it was several options. Constables are permitted to stand for elections to states, in addition being constable if wish. The constable to keep involved and access government or constables retain ex officio membership in the states, in not voting capacity. There was lots of options were put by PPC then in 2020, saying what are the options for constables to continue to be involved, to continue to contribute, and to really, really continue this connection to the states once they're doing extremely important job in the parishes. And I know how much constables work hard in the parishes and what level of work that parish work is required. I'm still considering how I'm personally voting for this, but I know how I voted in 2020, and I think I'm likely to stick with my vote in 2020 because it was proper consultation. And as Deputy Ozouf asked the right question, and I checked actually with the chair PPC, this would come back to the Assembly to final approval because legislation needs to come back forward. And all these options that was mentioned in PPC reform, how we're keeping constables' involvement and how constables continue to contribute and being part advisory role of the Assembly can come back. Something else I picked up from my speech, I've gone back to time and I look into my speech in 2020 where I said that I believe that the future election will be political parties. Actually, I think that I'm changing my mind now. I felt that I had this hope in 2020, 2025. I know that Reform Jersey is a very well-established party, but definitely people in my district was asking me at the door, are you party, not party, and we make a decision. So I think that I've changed my views on that. But if we are not, we're 20 years after the report, we're not going towards proper lots of political parties as Westminster, and we do have ministerial government. This is some work to PPC needs to be done, how we continue to be who we are when we have ministerial government and we don't have proper established political party systems. But it's for the next Assembly. Coming back to this, I do believe this is the only amendment was examined, and it was roadshows and it was meetings around the parishes, and have been about that 2020 proposition was removing to have one type of state member that we debated. So 4 minutes, thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Constable St Mary.
Thank you, sir. And I sense there might be an inaudible groan from some members to hear yet another constable speaking on this same issue. But I rise for two specific reasons. One, the term St Mary has been liberally used during this debate, and I wish to answer it on its behalf. And secondly, unlike most of my colleagues, I have served as deputy of my parish for 2 terms before becoming constable. And I recognise the difference between the 2 roles. I'm not sure it is fully understood. But to begin, to give credit where it is due, I was greatly surprised to hear from the proposer and Deputy Messick last night how much they appreciate the role of constables in the States. And that is good to hear. But it does beg the question as to why, therefore, is this amendment coming in the course of this debate? That they have... Reform has set out saw quite clearly that they wouldn't have brought it had not the proposition to bring in or introduce senators being established. But I suggest they are 2 separate things. And now is not that this is the ability of constables to stand in the States or otherwise must be a standalone debate, not be a mere add-on to the main debate, and it does confuse the issue. Going back to numbers, as it said, I thank Deputy Cole for acknowledging that I am where I am in the course of, in the terms of my own electorate. I do not have too many votes to go for. But I simply flagged the point that the constable vote in St Mary was the best turnout of all. It was a contested election, as indeed have the last 4 or 5 been. And having acquired approximately 55% of votes, I'm no way embarrassed at taking my seat in the Assembly representing my parish. In fact, I think I'd be more embarrassed if I had even a few more hundred votes at a low turnout, which afflicts some of the other districts, but that is another story. And going back to the question of the constable's role in the states, and some of Deputy Tadier's comments require some riposte. When standing as constable, we are in fact standing in the knowledge that it is a dual role position. The electorate know it is a dual role position. So that is the short answer. If a potential constable stands and makes no secret of the fact that he wishes to spend all his time in the parish without taking forward parish's views to the Assembly, the electorate will have a view on that and vote accordingly. It is as simple as that. And that is it. Where constables do, or as constables do, appear in the states, their contribution to states matters is partly a matter for them and partly a matter for the Assembly. In a parish like St Mary, properties tend to engender more work, so basically the Constable of St Mary probably has fewer parish matters to deal with than some other constables. And having been blessed with a very efficient parish staff, that perhaps applies to me. During my first year in office as constable, I made no offer to be part of a scrutiny panel, unlike my two previous terms as deputy, where I was chair of two of the main panels. And that was simply to get my feet under the table to see what the job of constable entailed. After a year, I felt more relaxed about taking on more work, and I was pleased and in fact honoured to be asked by the chair of one panel to join them, which I duly did. And following the changing government, the new chair of that panel asked the same thing on the basis that she wanted a constable on the panel, thereby recognising the value of constables in the states. And this brings me to my final point, so that it's perhaps a trivial one, but I refer to the way the seating arrangements for constables are arranged at the beginning of each session. Deputies, as I understand, or certainly my stage, were granted a place in the pecking order according to the seniority of the returning officer. When I was elected constable, I returned to Parish Hall to find that the parish secretary had received an email from the State Scref asking had I served in any of the following positions: Sergeant with Chef de Police, Centenier, Vantenier, Constable's Officer, running down to Procurer and Rates Assessment. And the link there is that all those people and officers, holy order officers, appear before the Royal Court and take an oath. And the constable, as head of that honorary system, is the link. And if constables are not in the States Assembly, that will be a direct affront to their commitment to the system. And it appears to be a trivial point, but that link is a true one. It is public acknowledgement of the service of all members of the honourary system to good government in the island. Constables represent that service, represent that link, and it would be against the principles of good government if we were, as a body, removed from the states. So on that basis, sir, and as I'm sure members will appreciate, I shall be voting against this particular amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin Tarr. Deputy Breniff.
Thank you, sir. There's been some excellent speeches, actually, and so I'll try and keep my comments brief. I would take issue with Deputy Gardner's point that we have failed to convince the public about the merits of the current system. I think it would be fairer to say that we've failed to convince a small number of people who have always rejected who have always been against the removal of the senators. Those people have not been convinced and have never been convinced, but I don't accept that that's a majority of the public. So there are two effects of this amendment. It actually has two parts, as I understand it. One is to remove the automatic right of the constables to sit in the Assembly, and the second is to create 12 new senator positions. And I have slightly different views about both of those two parts. The constable's role in island life is indeed vital. I bow to no one in my admiration for the constables who do so much in their parishes. It is an incredible role, and some of the constables who have spoken today, the Constable of St. Martin, Constable of St. John, and so on, and Constable of St. Mary have made the point very eloquently about the work that they do in their parishes. And they've also made the point that that is a role that they feel is enhanced by their position in the Assembly. But this is about the automatic right of constables to sit in the Assembly, not the right of constables to sit in the Assembly. This amendment would not remove the right of constables to sit in the Assembly, it would remove the automatic right of constables to sit in the Assembly, and I think that is an important distinction. Deputy Tadier highlighted that we rarely look at the counterfactual. What would the role of the constable look like if there was not an automatic right to sit in the Assembly? What kind of talent might we attract to the role from people who have no desire, strangely enough, to sit here, but might have a desire to reinvigorate their parish. They might have a desire to reinvigorate the way in which parish services are delivered and so on. Those people are currently not considered in this, and that is, I think, an important point to make. Jersey's identity has survived many changes to island life and indeed to the political system. Rectors and jurats have left the Assembly, and strangely enough, Jersey's unique identity has survived. It's also survived the removal of the senators, unless I'm much mistaken. We are still an island who cherishes a link to the Crown that has the rights and privileges that have been built up over centuries, and those are not in doubt dependent on which class of members have an automatic right to sit in the Assembly. So I respectfully make the point that it is possible to that I disagree with those who feel that the role of the automatic right to sit in of the constables to sit in the assemblies trumps the issue of fairness. For me, it doesn't, and I'm sorry about that in terms of the respect in which I hold the constables. The issue of fairness is one that trumps everything else in my mind. It is about fundamental rights. I would not, so I would say that it is not, I disagree, I'm a very rarely disagree, but I do disagree with my fellow St. Brillard Deputy Miles on the question of outside bodies. And I think the expertise of outside bodies is not something that should be denigrated when they are based on fundamental values. And that fundamental value, in which case we've forgotten it, is about equal voter representation. It is simply wrong, in my view, to have such significant underrepresentation of urban areas in the Assembly. I also think, by the way, that it's a fundamental principle that we should have a single class of member in the States. But that is not what is at issue in this amendment. I read with interest, just as a little sidebar thought, Deputy Scott's emails, and in particular the one that talked about fractional voting as a way of resolving the issue of the constables' misrepresentation, if you like, of different types of votes. I'm not suggesting I advocate it, but I would say that it is an interesting tool to look at the question of that, how significant that underrepresentation of rural areas is. And I did a little tiny bit of a few sums, and on the basis of the census figures, and if we were to have fractional voting and allocate votes to the constables in accordance to their population, They currently have 12 votes, and if those were divided up according to fractional voting, I'm sure Deputy Scott will correct me if she wishes, that I have it as St Helier Constable would have 4.2 votes, in fact, 4.2 votes. He'd almost be a political party in his own right. He'd certainly become a very popular person, I think, in terms of being lobbied. Whereas I'm sorry to pick on St Mary again, but St Mary would have a quarter of a vote. So that's something like a 16 times difference in voting.
Sorry, would the deputy mind giving way?
To give way to Deputy Scott for point of
Why
clarification.
not?
Yes, sorry,
Yes,
just
Deputy Scott.
because actually what I proposed was actually that the deputy St Helier would be elected Iron wide, which is a different issue. I proposed it for 11 members, so but maybe he might go on to the next highest.
I'm grateful to the member. I'm sorry I've misrepresented her system. Let me say that I've taken her system and adapted it to my own purposes, which is simply to use it to show that the level of underrepresentation that currently exists in terms of the representation of the urban areas and the more populous parishes generally. Of course, there are other potential interesting side effects of if we were to adopt fractional voting. I think it would make the call for the appel possibly slightly less popular, given that we would know that there would be a calculation have to go on to work out the votes afterwards. It would be an interesting one. Just to be clear, I'm not recommending it. So I respectfully say to members that is my position on whether the constables should sit automatically in the Assembly or not. The second question, though, is the issue of whether there should be 12 senators, and on this I feel much more conflicted. I do not believe that we should have a divided assembly. I do believe that we should have a single class of member. I do not believe in the hierarchy that is implicit in having senators in the assembly. I accept that the purpose of this amendment is it has been brought in the context of a debate to bring back senators and is an attempt to improve on that, on the existing proposition, but I find it quite hard to support the idea of bringing in 12 senators. I guess the reason I will, I think, support this amendment is because I will also be supporting the PPC amendment. And the PPC amendment suggests that we should delay implementation. And I think that would give the chance to consider this question in a more detail and to fine-tune it and to make potential changes at the point when the actual legislation would have to come in, and we would have plenty, the next assembly would have plenty of time to consider that issue. So on that basis, I will support the amendment, but with that reservation.
Thank you, Deputy. Conatawa St Helier.
Thank you, sir. I was going to speak on the matter of the return of the senators, but various members have referred to me in their speeches about the removal of the constables, particularly Deputy Tadier, when he mentioned 11 of the 12. And so I thought I should probably make my position clear at this stage, though I don't believe it will make any difference at all to the outcome of the vote, which was probably never in doubt from the beginning. So as members will know, I have for many years made reference to my good friend, the Constable of St Mary, and his predecessors. In fact, we often seem to be bracketed together as a kind of unholy union of the most gerrymandered parish with St Helier. I've used that word myself in the States. But so in the last few years, I have noticed a few interesting things about how votes operate. There's no question that the system of having the Constable of St Mary and the Constable of St Helier with the same voting power is unfair. It's not right. In an ideal world, it wouldn't happen. In an ideal world, we might be in a separate chamber. That's, as I see it, the only sensible way of resolving the problem, because the idea that I should have 4 votes to St Mary's quarter vote is simply not going to happen. And I've certainly had a bit of a reality check. I've begun to think that actually people who want to remove the constables are tilting at windmills. It isn't going to happen. We all know that, and it's surprising that debate is going on so long. It isn't going to happen. So the question for me is, do I continue to tilt at the windmill of voter equity? Or do I look at some of the other pragmatic considerations that are in front of me? And I have to say, sir, that one of them results from the fact that I believe that the interests of my voters in St Helier will be well served in the coming year when I bring a couple of propositions which are in my manifesto and which I am determined to bring to the States, hopefully successfully. And I think I can probably count on a vote from the Constable of St Mary, but I don't think I can count on the vote of 8 of my deputies, because their reform manifesto pits them against me in what I'm trying to achieve in my parish. And so that's where voter equity becomes quite interesting. A political party, actually, with 8 votes, is going to make my job in achieving my manifesto promises much harder. And from what I know about the politics of the Constable of St Mary, I'm pretty sure he will support. And I'm pretty sure that the voters of St Mary will support some of the things that I'm trying to achieve. Now, Deputy Coles in his opening remarks said that the parishes don't rely on constables being in the Assembly. This, of course, is absolutely wrong. St Helier voters, those who with long memories, will know that for centuries St Helier was disadvantaged because States buildings did not pay rates. And it took me, I don't know whether it was 10, 15, 20 years, but I got it done. I had to come back again and again. Deputy Ozouf is nodding, but he knows that he blocked me when he was Treasury Minister. I came back again and again, and I got that through the States, and it was an important thing to do for St Helier. Now, that couldn't have been done unless I was a member of the States. Now, it's been said that we could run as deputy, constables could also stand as deputy, and perhaps Deputy Coles' proposition would have a bit more likelihood of getting through if he had actually specified a mechanism that would have allowed the constables who wished to stand for deputy or senator. The problem there, of course, is you probably wouldn't get all 12. You might get 6, you might get 8, but would you get all 12, particularly if some of them had already professed a desire not to be spending days in these sort of debates, but would rather be back in the parish hall getting stuff done for their parishioners? I suspect you wouldn't have all 12 constables. The 12 constables do meet every month, as members will know. The meetings are open to the public, not widely attended, it has to be said, but they're open to the public. And that meeting of the Comité des Connétables is a really important body, and it does really good work. So I believe that if you didn't have all 12 in the States Assembly, then some parishes will be diminished. Some parishes wouldn't be able to get their constable to argue. And you might say, well, they can get their deputy to bring it to the States. But hang about, what if the deputies don't actually agree with what the constable is trying to do? If I may give an example, the extension of the Millennium Town Park. The majority of my deputies don't agree with it. So I couldn't say to my deputies, well, I'm not in the States, but please will my deputies bring that forward, because they won't. So for reasons of pragmatism, and because frankly I'm tired of tilting at windmills, I'm going to support the retention of the constables in the States, and I will go on to support, for reasons which I'll explain later, the reintroduction of senators. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Vital. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Luce.
Thank you, sir. So I'd like to just start by taking members back to 2020 on the 3rd of December and P139, and something I said during a debate then. And I said this: I have always said that if there were to be a single representative for the parish, that should be the constable, and I would vote myself out of office in order that my constable could continue to represent me as the parish representative in the Assembly. And at the end of that debate, sir, I pushed my button to remove the office of a single deputy for St Martin in order that we removed the senators and started the larger constituencies. Had I known, sir, the reaction of my then parishioners in St Martin and my now constituents in St Martin and Greville, I almost certainly would have pushed the button the other way, and we'll get on to the benefits or otherwise of senators in the Assembly later in this debate. But I want to talk just very briefly, if I may, about constables and why I believe they are so essential to the good running of this Assembly. So I've had the pleasure and privilege of knowing now 3 Lieutenant Governors during my terms of office in this Assembly, and one in particular I got to know pretty well, and in discussions with him about the time before he came to the island, he said to me that he had been amazed at the huge number of charities which he saw on a list when he was given before he arrived on the island, and he told me that he found it almost incredulous that we would have so many, and wondered how they operated. But when he came to the island, he was amazed to find the wonderful, fantastic work that all those very, very many charities do in Jersey, and we have the privilege of having so many of them here. And it's my view, sir, that charities on the island are so proliferate and so well organised and worked for by islanders, and I think that harks back to the honorary system that we have here in Jersey. And it may not be the honorary system today, but if I go back a generation or 2 generations, there is no question in my mind that the honorary system in the parishes around the island was the reason so many people volunteer now. In those days, and as we have now, we have people who volunteer without pay to be rates assessors on the rates committee, roads inspectors, roads committee. They help the constables with the running of the parishes at no cost. And I believe, sir, that it's that feeling of the honorary system that has meant over the years that our island is so good at doing voluntary work. I worry, sir, really worry about removing the constables from the Assembly and the effect that it would have on the honorary system in the parishes. And you only need to look not very far across the water to see what's happened to the role where constables have been removed in Guernsey, and they struggle to find people not only to come forward for the position of constable, but also for other positions within their parishes. Sir, for me, the constable is one of the most important people in these Assembly. I think the way Jersey organises itself and runs, it pays a great tribute to them, and I think it would be a very bad day that if they would ever be removed from this Assembly. And some may say, well, yes, but that creates an unfair system. And my answer would be that I would just pose this question. Are we better off to have a slightly unfair system or a much better system? Because for me, constables in the States provide the far better system. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member speak on the First Amendment? Colin Thompson-Brillard.
Thank you, sir. And I take this opportunity to thank my fellow constables for their input into this debate. They all have different views, and I think they put them forward eloquently to the members here today. The risk in my speaking to this amendment, sir, is that one might be accused of giving views with self-interest at their base. I would assure members, sir, that this is not the case, and views I might express on the proposition of Deputy Coles are based on my experience of having the privilege of holding the role for several years, working with my 11 colleagues in a similar position, and importantly, the interests of electors of our island. Added to that, sir, I have, since my initial election in 2005, sat through numerous debates on the subject and had the opportunity to peruse endless statistics whipped up to support the proposition of the day. I would refer, sir, members to the Murray poll commissioned by PPC in August of 2006, which made interesting reading because it's all been done before. Much of that information is still pertinent, and members may wish to take a look. One small paragraph that I just will refer members to about constables. Opinions about the future of constables are strongly held. More residents strongly agree or disagree that they should remain than hold a moderate opinion. Half of residents, 53%, think that constables should remain as states members, 30% strongly. A third, 35%, disagree, 21% strongly. And this is all more significant in the light of the fact that constables are the type of states member that more residents feel that they know at least a little bit about. That was 68%. So. I'm sceptical about advice given by various electoral commissions and advisors, which we've seen over the years. They've often been the views of those from other countries, and with the greatest of respect from the UK in particular, and which really don't align with what works in Jersey. And we saw, and I know so, your father was involved with the clothing report going back to 2000, and that was half taken up, I think is fair to say. Our views as connotabs often vary. We are not a party, but we collectively have life experience which enables us to make balanced decisions, fed by the opinions of parishioners. I believe, sir, that we as connotabs provide the Assembly with a stability that is something important amongst the volatile situations prevailing in countries and is something valued by a lot of residents in the island. We've all been elected with a significant number of votes, and I have a reasonable mandate to represent my parishioners, as do others. Whilst the role will always need to evolve to modern day requirements, and I don't think any of us would deny that, I believe that since the connotabs have been part of this Assembly for centuries, they would be removed at peril and detrimental to the links with the public who we represent. The public so agreed that the connotabs remain in the states in a referendum as referred to by others a few years ago, and I can't see any evidence to suggest there should be any change. We are in the Assembly to serve the public, and I believe our links between the electors and the parishes put us in an ideal position to make representations to this Assembly in the interests of our electorate, our parishioners. I would urge members, sir, to reject this amendment for the reasons mentioned and in the interests of continued stability of the island. Thank you, sir.
Does any other member speak on the amendment? Deputy Rob Ward.
Thank you, sir. I've been listening intently. So I want to make a couple of points here, first of all. I know Deputy Cole's brought this proposition, but I stood on a manifesto of one type of states member in equal-sized constituencies. But we compromised, and we compromised in the last time we voted on this to get the new version of what we're doing, because we saw that we could move forward, that the equity of vote, and equity of vote is very important, certainly important to the constituents I speak to, the equity of the vote was better. And so we, as a group, as a party, and I started counting how many times we were mentioned, but I stopped. I get to quote, I think it was Oscar Wilde again, the only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about. So thank you for the publicity. But anyway, to move forward positively, and we compromised because we saw this was a way forward. And in the last election, we returned the most diverse and representative assembly of this population than we've ever had. And we were happy with that. But a proposition was brought again to return senators and upset that balance of equity of vote. And so therefore, Deputy Coles, using logic, which he's very good at, decided, and quite rightly, that there is a payoff, there's a cost. And that cost, and this is the reality in front of people, that there is a cost. And if you don't want the cost of losing the constables, when one has to think very carefully about the cost of equity when we move to the final votes. So this is what this debate is as much as anything about, the cost of making that change.
Deputy Scott, do you wish to?
Sorry, just sorry. I'm great. Could
Do
you
I
give,
get a chance
may I-
to
Well, you haven't got
finish my
to, you haven't got to
speech?
give way. You haven't got to give way.
If possible, I would like to go through and ask a question
I'll-
then.
I'll answer
do
at the
now.
end,
If it's all right,
yeah.
Go on, do it now. It's fine. Sorry.
No, sorry. It's just this point on diversity. You're saying that the actual system is to be skewed to allow diversity.
No, thank you, sir. I can answer. What I mean is, I believe, sir, that we have more, for example, female representation in this assembly than we've ever had. We have more representation from different communities on our island than we've ever had. So that's what I mean by diversity. I think that's pretty clear. Yeah. And we mustn't take that lightly. We mustn't take that representation lightly, because I firmly believe that when people see people like them in this assembly, they will more likely to engage in this assembly. When they see people that they believe represent or understand their situation in life, they are more likely to engage in this assembly. And I mean, it is a real challenge when, well, I'll talk about that in the final debate. And I've been trying to think about the way of explaining this to myself as much as anything else. And by making the change to return senators without making and remove deputies, i.e. without making the change that Deputy Coles is suggesting, you end up with an inequity in the voter value. So a vote in one area, one district, is not the same as the rest. So if you like, and I've thought about how we could express this, members of different districts have different amounts of jam. At the moment, they're pretty equal. I use jam, not simply to get Deputy Ward's attention, but I think I've got it now. Okay, it's nice to have a smile across the Assembly for a change, and I think it's nice to bring it to this level now. That's quite nice, actually. Thank you, sir. By making the change, our levels of jam across our districts are pretty even at the moment. By taking some of those deputies out, we uneven that amount of jam. Okay, that's agreed. By adding senators, we get another pot of jam and we distribute that evenly. We keep the inequity, we just move up the amount of jam that everyone's got. It's still unequal. And that is where I'm coming from. But some people's jam is still worth a lot more than other people's jams. And that is a really key point. If that's what you believe equity is, then I'm afraid there's a fundamental error in your understanding of that. And that's the issue that I get brought to me by constituents and people that I speak to. On my way in this morning, there's a gentleman who stops me quite frequently with his wife and has a chat. I don't know what his political support is or not. We talked about all sorts of things. I thought he was going to come to me and say, because I was being stereotypical in my view, I was going to say, I want you to do so and so. And he said, please, Rob, because it's not deputy, and that's quite important, because the title is not important. It's not about titles, it's about representation. Yeah? Please, he said, don't bring back 3 different types. It doesn't work. People don't want it. It's a snapshot. But we've heard a lot about snapshots, haven't we? In so many issues. And without proper polls that go on all of the time and hear Maury polls of our population, etc., it's very difficult to find out what the genuine beliefs are. So, sir, the solution that Deputy Coles is suggesting is about that voter equity. Now, I understand, and I've already compromised previously to say keep constables but keep our districts. If you want to keep the constables and vote against this, but then vote for senators, you are trying to get your jam today and tomorrow, but in a very unequitable way. And I think we need to think very carefully about what we're voting for. So it could be said to be opportunities with this change. Constables still exist. They could apply and stand as senators. And perhaps the parish voice and an whole island voice together would be a very powerful position for constables to be as well. So there could be advantages here in terms of representation. So I don't think we should throw them all away. But this isn't a personal debate. This is purely about logic and about that issue of how we are going to make sure that everybody is equally represented. The simplest way may well be to simply have one type of states member, all island-wide voting. It's happened in our sister island, and I think there's some question as to whether that's been the right decision. I won't say what the constable is mowing to me at the moment, but whether that's been successful or not, I don't know. But we have had change, and I think if we're going to make another change, two types of states member is the right thing to do at this stage, and that is the payoff that you're being asked about. If you don't agree with that, vote accordingly. We are still a democracy, thankfully. The world is changing, but we are still a democracy. But please think ahead when we come to later votes as well as to whether you're going to apply the same issues of keeping the system that's equitable that we have now, allowing that compromise, and again bringing this assembly together as we were before on this decision. And I just want to mention one thing, sir, which is sort of an elephant in elephant in the chamber, so to speak. I have to say, I do not believe that the last system of voting is what created a vote of no confidence. A vote of no confidence has happened repeatedly in this assembly. I was trying to look back, and I think every single, I may be wrong, but I think every single iteration of the assembly, every single time had a vote of no confidence somewhere along the line. So it was not the voting system that created that. It was different dynamics, sir. And so I think we need to separate that away from it as well, in case anyone's thinking that. So I will obviously support my party colleague, and I think we need to keep the compromise be to two states and members, but keep the equity and the deputy representation. And I'll talk on the final debate about other issues around senatorial candidates. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak? Deputy Iyer.
Thank you, sir. I will be brief because I think we're all aware which way this vote's going to go. But there is one point that I'd like to raise concerning the amendment, but also concerning the proposition as well, because it was raised in Deputy Cole's report. He mentions that some voters have reported nostalgia for the senators because they like the ability to cast a large number of votes. But this, in my opinion, is not the case in practice. In 2014, there were 18 candidates standing for 8 senatorial places, and on average, people voted for 6.1 candidates. In 2018, there were 17 candidates with 8 seats available, and the average number of votes reduced to 5.6. So there seems to be a gradual decline in the number of candidates selected, and the idea that everybody uses all of their allocated votes has definitely not been made. So although 20% of the population would like to see the return of senators, when they are given the opportunity to vote for them, they tend not to vote for their full allocation. In Guernsey, they have the ability to vote for 38 candidates, but the average number of votes cast per individual was less than 25. So although we are going to be affecting voter equity, it seems that the amount of votes that we could possibly give to people to vote for senators, either 12, albeit the 9 or the possible 8, the members of the public will not take them up. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member speak on the amendment? I call upon Deputy Coles to reply. Deputy Coles.
Thank you, sir, and thank you for everybody who has participated in this debate. I will start off with a quick apology to Deputy Balash for my point of clarification at the end of the last sitting. I wasn't aware of how many people would actually mention the referendum, and so I was trying to get it clear that that was the referendum that saw the senators not return but maintain the constables and the deputies as we see it now, because I think it is an important fact. Because my amendment to this was to propose the voter equity side of it, to show that the alternative to what is presented as the main proposition would not maintain that essence of voter equity. As we mentioned, the elements of your 3 choices of island-wide, parish or voter equity. Now, and the fact that you cannot achieve all 3 within the same, with having 3 types of member in the assembly. So, but I am glad that so many other members have actually mentioned that referendum, because I think it was a very, very important referendum, and it will always need to be considered. I'm looking through my notes, and again, I wrote at the start of this because Deputy Scott spoke first, and she mentioned a guillotine, and I was hoping she wasn't trying to give the constables ideas. So I do feel there was a lot of defensiveness, and I'm not surprised really, a lot of defensiveness coming from the constables' benches, but I don't believe that I mentioned that any of them do a bad job or they don't work hard. In fact, I'm very impressed that some of the constables are able to run their parishes, sit as ministers, assistant ministers, and do the level of work that they do. But of course, like I said, this isn't personal, this is about voter equity and trying to amend a proposition that seeks to reform our assembly that has been brought for the third time. To the Constable of St Martin, she mentioned obviously that I lodged this with 2 weeks' notice. I could have lodged it with a week's notice. So I thought, I gave that to where it was. And we actually had the discussion because as a party we do discuss things. And this also goes to a point that Deputy Balash raised around one of the other amendments that Deputy Taddy is going to bring later. And we decided to stage our amendments the way they are, so you don't tie all your eggs in one basket. So if we lost this vote, the ability to vote on what Deputy Taddy vote amendments come separately. So I'm just going to point out a little thing to the Constable of St Helier, because I know what he's referring to. And so I'd like to refer him to my very first amendment within this Assembly, which was P97 2021 Amendment 21. Because he mentions obviously that his 8 Reform Jersey candidates in St Helier might not support him on his future propositions. However, I'd like to say that it was his other 4 St Helier representatives that voted against my amendment, which lost by 3 votes. And including another deputy of St Helier South who voted against it in his district, against his manifesto. But of course, this also brings us on about the importance of manifesto pledges. And there is no resentment to Deputy Miller for her bringing her right, as she stated in her manifesto, to bring her proposition, as she has. But of course, it is in our manifesto that we seek one type of candidate voted island-wide. But of course, I can't amend a proposition to completely change its theme and to where it is now, but this was what was allowed. However, we haven't brought a proposition about the whole reform of the Assembly again, because we did agree with the compromise agreement. But it's that compromise which is under threat, and the threat of it is this voter inequity again. I kind of wanted to paraphrase George Orwell and to carry on Deputy Ward's analogy when we're talking about jam, because how he explained it at the end, everybody would have jam, but some people's jam would be more equal than others. So this is what this is fundamentally about. It's not, again, saying that people who sit in the constable seats are not good at their job. They are all very, very capable, as is every other member of this Assembly. It's about the voter equity. I've had many conversations with people in my previous walk of life who were very much involved with their parishes, enjoyed being part of their parish, but wouldn't sit for constables because they couldn't deal with, and I'm toning down the words they use, sir, the faff that is the Assembly. They would rather just to focus on their parochial issues, and if that was an option that they didn't have to be states members, that they would probably have a chance of running for constable. Again, that is creating people the option and choices of what the roles are entailing. So, sir, there was also allegations, not necessarily in this chamber, but outside this chamber, that this might have been considered a wrecking amendment. It's not a wrecking amendment at all, sir. It's providing the options. Because there are options to this that means we can have the senators return, but remain voter equity. But to keep the voter equity, unfortunately, that means the cost of the constables. So I don't actually think it's right that we as states members should decide on how the boundaries and everything is decided, because that is gerrymandering, and I think that will come up more in other parts of this debate. But so this is one thing that we need to keep in mind. Any decision that we ever make within our Assembly is about making sure that people have an equal right and an equal say. And so that is what this amendment is about. It is about voter equity. So, sir, if this proposition is going to be adopted, I wish that everybody can support me in keeping our voter equity as the key. Thank you, sir, and I call for the appel.
Thank you, Deputy. The appeal has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting. If all members have the chance of casting their votes, then I invite the greffier to close the voting. I can announce that the amendment has been rejected. 11 votes pour, 33 votes contre, and 1 abstention.
May we have the 11, please, sir?
Those members voting pour, Deputies Southern, Tadier, Ayer, Bob Ward, Alves, Mesick, Coles, Renouf, Catherine Curtis, Beltham and Kovac. Those members voting contre, the Conitab of St Helier, St Lawrence, St Brelard, Trinity, St Peter, St Martin, St John, Grouville, St Juan, St Mary, St Saviour, and Deputies Labby, Luce, Morel, Lahegara, Gorst, Farnham, Moore, Ozouf, Balash, War, Miles, Scott, Rose Binet, Miller, Howe, Tom Binet, Ferry, Annex Curtis, Barbara Ward, Wilson, Stevenson, and Andrews, and Deputy Gardner abstained.
So I'm sure it's been noted, but could I just ask that Deputy Porre be marked excuse? I think she had given notice that she wouldn't be here.
Well, she's attended. She attended this morning, so she's not marked excuse as such. But we note that she has a good reason for not being here because that was accepted earlier on. Yes, the second amendment has been lodged by Deputy Mesick, and I ask the greffier to read the amendment.
Page 2, paragraph A, delete the words by removing 1 deputy from each of the 9 electoral constituencies and substituting 9 senators in their place. And page 2, paragraph A, after paragraph A, insert a new paragraph B as follows and redesignate the subsequent paragraphs accordingly. B, that an independent boundaries commission, as approved by the Assembly under P139 of 2020, should be established to produce an analysis of the impact of reintroduction of senators on voter equity and the island's compliance with the Venice Commission's Code of Good Practice in Electoral Matters. And page 2, paragraph B, after the words to bring forward the, insert the words findings of the Independent Boundaries Commission of the Assembly prior to the implementation of the, after the words to give effect to, insert the words part A of, and delete the words in time for the general election in 2026.
Deputy Mesick.
Thank you, sir. And before I crack on into the main speech that I prepared for this, I would like to, I think, correct some misconceptions that were raised in previous debates on amendments in the last 2 days, but which are relevant to this amendment, because this amendment, of course, refers to the Venice Commission. So on 2 occasions, at least, in the last 2 days, I have heard members suggesting that the Venice Commission has anything to do with the European Union. So that is completely false. It has nothing to do with the European Union. It is a body of the Council of Europe, which is a completely separate institution. It does, however, use the same flag as the European Union, but I think that's just to confuse us, which is a tactic that clearly works. So another, I think, misconception raised about the Venice Commission, about it being guidelines and not being binding.
Will you accept a point of clarification from Deputy Morel? Are you prepared to give way?
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. It's genuine. It's just to, would the Deputy clarify that the UK remains a member of the Council of Europe?
Yes, so I don't think I said anything to suggest it didn't. The Council of Europe is separate.
No, it's just clarifying that it is so separate that the UK remains a part of it.
Indeed, and it also has lots of member states that have never been members of the European Union as well. It is the body that governs the European Convention on Human Rights and its institutions that support that. Which brings me on to that second point, sir, which is that it was suggested, of course, that the Venice Commission is only guidelines. It's not legally binding. Well, sir, that is technically true, but I'll tell you something that's not guidelines and which is legally binding, and that is the European Convention on Human Rights, which is binding on Jersey, not just through the international obligations we have, but through our own domestic legislation in the form of the Human Rights Jersey Law 2000. And the European Convention on Human Rights says, under Protocol 1, Article 3, that we have the right to free elections. It says the high contracting parties undertake to hold free elections at reasonable intervals by secret ballot under conditions which will ensure the free expression of the opinion of the people in the choice of the legislature, sir. Something that is an absolutely fundamental principle for anyone who believes in democracy and human rights, and is absolutely a major consideration in determining how we form our electoral systems, whatever your politics are on any other angle, unless, of course, you're not a Democrat. But, sir, to get to the main argument I want to make for this proposition. So this amendment was inspired because of one single sentence in the report to Deputy Miller's proposition. When describing her proposal to remove one deputy from each of the districts to make room for the senators, she says, and this is a direct quote, "Under this arrangement, the voting system would maintain its existing level of equity." And, sir, that is false. It is not accurate, and that is not a matter of opinion. It is a matter of mathematics, because voter equity is determined by a specific formula. The term voter equity is not one that anyone can simply co-opt to reinforce their own subjective view of fairness. It is an objective term. Voter equity, sir, is the principle that voters should have, as far as possible, equal voting power to everyone else when deciding the makeup of a parliament. And that goes back to that point in the European Convention on Human Rights about the free expression to choose their legislature. How much weight or power your vote has is determined by a simple ratio. It's the ratio of population to number of representatives in your district. And then the equity is determined by comparing these ratios across the districts in the system and measuring how far they deviate. Perfect equity is when that ratio is the same across all districts. And of course, in a senatorial election, the voter equity is perfect. It's absolute, because the ratio of population to numbers of representatives is the same no matter where you live in the island. The deviation is zero. And I think that's one of the reasons why in some quarters the senatorial election system is popular. But in P2, the senators would just be one part of the system. To work out voter equity overall, you have to look at the totality of the system. Voter equity is therefore determined under P2 by the ratio of population to number of representatives in the districts and the parishes, because there is significant variation across those districts. In the parish constable elections, the ratio is all over the place, and I know we've made this point already, but the population in the various parishes varies hugely, with St Mary with about 1,800 people and St Helier with 36,000 people. That is extreme variance by all accounts, which is vastly inequitable on its own. But that's where the deputies come in, because the deputies are distributed across the districts specifically to mitigate the malapportionment that is provided by the presence of the constables, so you can still have voter equity and constables. And the system that we have actually does that quite neatly. It's not absolutely perfect, but it's not too bad, and it's certainly far more equitable than what we had before 2022 by all objective measures based on that formula. And so currently we manage that apportionment to get things as fair as possible whilst accommodating the presence of the constables in the states across a membership of 49 with 12 constables and 37 deputies. In P2, the apportionment is instead to be done across 40 members. And in that 40, the constables will make up a greater proportion than they do in 49. Again, basic maths. Their contribution to the apportionment goes from 25% to 30%, which means you have less wriggle room to distribute the deputy seats to mitigate against that malapportionment. And that is why just cutting off a single seat from the deputies' districts does not leave voter equity unaffected. In the appendix to this amendment, I've laid the maths out to show conclusively that voter equity in P2 is worse across the totality of that proposed system than our current system. More islanders stand to lose voting power compared to others who stand to gain from it. And that means, sir, that we risk getting a less representative assembly. It means we do the opposite of what the States has previously committed to in previous decisions, which is to base fairness and equity as key considerations in moving forward on our electoral system. And, sir, I would argue it goes against the spirit of that line which we are bound by in the European Conventions on Human Rights about ensuring the free expression of the people in their choice of legislature by distorting that so that the overall composition of this assembly is less reflective of what the public actually want. And that, sir, is what this amendment seeks to safeguard against. It seeks to do something that in this day and age is very dangerous and radical. It seeks to ensure states members have access to the facts before making a decision. A novel concept in this day and age, I appreciate. It doesn't stop members from making whatever decision they like. It doesn't bypass states members. It simply says that when we have committed to ensuring voter equity as the basis for future reforms of the composition of the states, we should be presented with the cold, hard data in advance of making decisions that will affect it. We're constantly told we need to stop and collect data when it comes to so many other decisions, so why not this one? If this amendment is accepted, and the proposition is accepted in principle, we will get that objective analysis in advance of the very final decision on this, so we can make up our minds to make sure we're doing the right thing. And perhaps, if a minor tweak or two would improve it, we have the knowledge to know that we could do that and still remain within the spirit of the proposition. So, sir, let me preempt the arguments that I'm sure will be made against this amendment, and I can hear them now, sir. Why create another expensive body to tell us what to do? So let's unpick that, because each part of it is wrong. Firstly, sir, it doesn't have to be another body, because we already have the Jersey Electoral Authority, an existing non-political institution that helps with the running of our elections. We can set up the Boundaries Commission as simply a sub-part of that already existing institution. Easy. Secondly, sir, it doesn't have to be expensive, because the JEA already exists with a budget, and the work to produce these analyses would not be expensive anyway. Sir, I've done a rudimentary job of it myself in the appendix to this proposition, and I did it for free. But in reality, the JEA could simply commission an academic to do it properly. That would cost a few £100, maybe a few £1,000, peanuts in the grand scheme of the cost of holding an election. And in fact, sir, it's something that PPC has done in the past from their own budget, off their own back, in relation to other work they were doing without states' decisions to compel them. They've previously used the services of Dr. Alan Rennick from the University of Reading, who's an expert on voting systems and did lots of work for us and the previous Electoral Commission chaired by Deputy Balash to demonstrate voter equity in various iterations of potential reforms. They don't tell us what to do. They just say, if these are your boundaries, if this is the distribution you're planning, this is what it looks like, this is how the numbers work, and this is what would happen if you tweaked it. Do with that what you will. And so they wouldn't be telling us what to do, because it would still be perfectly free for us as a democratic chamber to conclude that the pros outweighed the cons in whatever iteration was before us, but at least we'd know for certain and not relying upon one sentence in a report which we can demonstrate as untrue. So another objection that I suspect might be coming would be based on the misnomer of using the word boundaries in the name of this Boundaries Commission, thinking that it would have any kind of authority to alter our boundaries. And that, of course, is wrong. It would not have that remit. We already have parishes and vantains that provide the basis for our boundaries. We don't need anything else. They're fine as they are, and the maths can show that we can use them for providing good voter equity, including with the constables in the Assembly, as long as we've got that data to show how it's done and how we can distribute those seats equitably. But lastly, and perhaps most concerning, it's something I think we've already heard so far in this debate, a suggestion that this voter equity thing just isn't that important at all. In fact, sir, some members even suggesting that it's some kind of foreign concept, not something for Jersey, it's something that it's these people from these other organisations that want to dogmatically impose on us like some colonial enterprise. Well, sir, I say, as a proud Jerseyman who was born on this island, that there is nothing un-Jersey about the principle of fair votes. It's something that's deeply ingrained in the Jersey culture that supports fairness and equity, sir. People fought and died for our right to express ourselves in free and fair elections. The principle of equal votes is not some abstract concept or something of only interest to theorists. It's absolutely fundamental. It is the means by which we ensure that the public actually get what they want out of our democracy through an equal opportunity to determine the political direction their community goes in. So forming constituencies to deliberately suppress the influence of some voters versus others is called gerrymandering, and it is an outrage. If you don't have equal votes, you don't have real democracy. What this amendment does, sir, is it allows us to get that objective analysis on whether we're moving closer to equal votes or closer to gerrymandering. Who could possibly argue against that when it's in the interest of all of those of us who call ourselves Democrats? And sir, if it's the decision of this Assembly to reintroduce senators, so be it. But we should make any decision on how we accommodate that and how we adjust the apportionment of the other members on the basis of facts and data to ensure we do not inadvertently disempower islanders in our elections. And so, sir, in adopting this amendment, we can provide a way to do that. It does not have to cost much money. It does not involve setting up more bureaucracy, and it does not involve asking people from outside the island to tell us what to do. It simply asks us to go for a view from academic experts who understand how the maths works here and tell us this is what the impact would be if you chose to do that. You can decide whether it's worth doing that or whether you'd like to make some final tweaks that could potentially improve the numbers. So I see nothing radical about that. I see nothing illogical about that, but that doesn't tend to be a consideration in many of these debates, unfortunately, from time to time. And so I make the amendment.
Deputy Scott, you want to speak next, or you want a point of clarification?
I want to speak next, thank you.
Sorry?
I'm to speak, sir.
Is the amendment seconded? Yes, sir. Thank you. Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. I thank Deputy Mesick for the clarification regarding the Venice Commission. I don't happen to believe anything in our system is preventing freedom of expression, so I didn't quite follow him why he rose that in the speech. I don't believe that anybody's trying to suppress it. Nor have I ever suggested that there should not be voter equity. In fact, I believe states members have witnessed me very much advocating the opposite. I don't argue with the Deputy's position that boundaries will need to be adjusted if the States Assembly is to continue working within the Venice Commission principles should the main proposition be adopted. He has sought to give a response to the objection that this amendment seeks to introduce a potential quango that will need to be funded at taxpayers' expense, which is pretty astute to anticipate that, given the Council of Ministers has committed to reduce red tape. It's a commitment reflected in many states' members' manifestos, including mine. And after the Chief Executive gave a highly publicised speech indicating that the number of spin-off bodies that this Assembly has created and still is creating is getting and has got out of hand. I just don't understand, given the argument that he's presented, why this amendment did not simply propose that the Electoral Commission is tasked with the role of reappraising the boundaries. We are a small jurisdiction. It's not like we're the size of the UK, where you've got lots and numerous, a much greater number of constituencies. Even now, we are capable of going through spreadsheets and actually coming up with alternative proposals. And of course, the figures do need to be looked at and rerun, and I'm sure the PPC will be proposing adjustments should the main proposition be adopted unamended. But I will, since the question of being fair has been raised, we'll come back to the actual issue about what we have right now, because I think that we're obscuring that we still have this system as a result of these super constituencies that can be played in a certain way. And one thing that still remains for this Assembly is to actually consider the circumstances in which this current system was brought, to consider that perhaps certain things weren't really disclosed in the report that actually brought this whole arrangement within which we are sitting now, and to actually ask, should we, particularly those of us who are independents, be considering that? But that, of course, I should be raising in the context of perhaps the main proposition. So I'll leave it there, sir. But I do note the general, the principle, the desire. I just don't believe that the solution actually is proportionate to what's needed. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Gardner.
Thank you, sir. Very quickly, and this is actually a question for clarification from Deputy Mazik when he will be summing up, as I completely share his views about equity of votes and about that it needs to be equal and review of the numbers and statistical exercise and democracy. I share the view. Now, I looked again at the amendment, and I would like to understand why it was put as establishing independent commission and not put adding, for example, as was suggested, completely legitimate that we have just electoral authority, that this part will be added. So it will be very clear that will not require tens of thousands of pounds and establishing another body, it's adding responsibility. And I'm not sure if the chair of PPC will be speaking, and if it will, it would be really, really helpful if this amendment will be rejected, and if the whole proposition will be adopted, or even proposition will not be adopted, if PPC would look to add this work to and bring back to the Assembly for the debate how the review of the boundaries can be done before the next elections. If any considerations was given at PPC, and if PPC is doing anything for the decision that was made in 2020 in some shape or form. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member speak on the second amendment? Deputy Balash.
So I am not opposed to the establishment of an independent boundaries commission, and indeed the Assembly has already voted
as Deputy Mezek pointed out in his report, to establish an independent boundaries commission. And it only remains for the PPC to take the necessary action to establish it. My problem with this amendment, and it's one that I hope that Deputy Mezek will be able to deal with, is that it seems to me to remove the certainty against which the Independent Boundaries Commission must work. In the resolution of the States of 2020, the resolution which was adopted on the 3rd of December to establish the current system, paragraph B of the minute records that an independent boundaries commission should be established to begin work after the 2022 elections to make recommendations to ensure that the 9 districts remain compliant with the principles cited in paragraph A. And the principles cited in paragraph A are the districts, the 9 districts which we currently have at present. Now, the problem with Deputy Mezek's amendment, as it seems to me, is that in paragraph 1, it provides delete the words by removing 1 deputy from each of the 9 electoral constituencies and substituting 9 senators in their place. So that if one looks at the revised paragraph A in the amendment, it reads that the office of senator elected on an island-wide basis should sit alongside the offices of connétable and deputy in the States Assembly and should be reinstated. But how many senators? 6 senators? 8 senators? 9 senators? 12 senators? The calculations will be different depending on how many senators are introduced and how they are brought into the current system, whether they are simply added on or whether they are introduced by removing deputies from each of the current districts, as Deputy Miller currently suggests in her proposition. I don't understand how the Boundaries Commission could do its work. So I, at present, am inclined to vote against this amendment. No harm will be done by voting against the amendment because the states have already resolved to establish an independent boundaries commission. And when it has something to do, no doubt it will be constituted by the PPC.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Alves.
Thank you, sir. And I just wanted to start by addressing actually the comment of Deputy Balash when he was talking about the number of senators and not understanding how the Boundaries Commission would be able to do its work based on that. So last term, I worked tirelessly on the current electoral reforms that we have in place. It took up the best part of 2 years of my life last term, and we did a number of consultations, including parish roadshows that were very well attended. We did focus groups. I think in the end, there was a total of about 3 propositions that were originally lodged, with one of them actually being withdrawn. And so, having come in as a mathematician, I took a very pragmatic look at our current makeup of the time. And I just saw it as a mathematical problem, and obviously didn't really think about the repercussions of other things, like how people felt about the constables and all of those things, which obviously we had to deal with afterwards. So to address Deputy Balash's point, when I was doing the various calculations and looking at various iterations on how we could split up the island to have equitable electoral districts, I did that work, and I was able to look at various iterations. We didn't come to the 9 districts overnight. There was a series of calculations, there was work done, there was analysis, there was a lot that happened behind the scenes that members were probably not that aware of. I was number crunching on my spreadsheets. My party know very well that I love my spreadsheets. And so it's not work that isn't doable. I did that. And that is the point of having a Boundaries Commission and for having people with the expertise and knowledges, because what they will do is they will look at different iterations and the impact that will have on voter equity and on the underrepresentation and overrepresentation percentages. So it's not work that is not doable. That is the point of having the expertise on that body. So I just also wanted to pick up on something else that was mentioned earlier. I think it was Deputy Scott who said that PPC may propose adjustments if the main proposition unamended is adopted. I wrote it down as she was saying that. So if the main proposition or whatever is passed today, PPC won't be able to do those calculations because it will be tied into what the Assembly has committed to and what the Assembly has agreed to. So even if PPC may look at it and think that this isn't the ideal number of senators, actually, because we can see in the calculations the impact that that has on representation in districts, we have to respect the Assembly's decision. That is democracy. I was going to touch on the Boundaries Commission, but I think Deputy Balash, bit of a slip there, sorry. Deputy Balash brought up that point quite clearly about what was proposed in the last term around the Independence Boundaries Commission. Unfortunately, we haven't agreed on anything or brought any proposals forward from PPC. I will leave the chair to kind of comment on that further. But I would say that this wouldn't stop us from maybe changing the terms of reference of the Boundaries Commission if we think that maybe the current composition that has been agreed is not ideal for whatever reason. And I think Deputy Mezek raised some good points that we do already have a body established. We've also got the Referendum Commission as well, which at the moment isn't doing very much and hasn't done very much for quite a while. So that may also be a body that could be used as the Independent Boundaries Commission as well. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. I won't repeat the line we all say about not intending to speak. But I would like to first highlight, before we get there, that there is always a risk of, as I like to say in the Assembly, making mountains out of molehills. And I think Deputy Mezek quite rightly said on the idea of a boundary commission, this can be an academic, it can be, we've seen actually academics contribute time to all sorts of island projects, the Law Society and others, where their contribution is unbiased, objective, and actually sometimes free of charge. But I do want to highlight the importance of understanding voter equity within the proposals. One member, if they're happy to be disclosed, shared an updated count of the voter equity under P2. These numbers were checked, I believe, with the Greffier, and I'm looking over to them to see if they're happy to be... they're not looking. I can try. So we have the numbers, though, and Deputy Mezek included them, and they've been reiterated by members on both sides of these arguments. And short basically saying is under 40 members that are not the senators, the areas where inequity occurs in voting, because we can take out any senatorial vote that's fully equitable, there are on average 2,500 people per seat, 2,582 based on the census data. And we've heard that the inequity or the variance to equity can be measured as to how many more people get one seat versus how many less. And currently, under our current scheme, Groovel and St Martin has 1,870 people per seat, and that's between those who are their deputies and the two constables. It goes as low as 1,613 members per seat in St Mary, St One and St Peter, and currently 2,803 members per seat in St Helier North. Now, the point about a Boundaries Commission is if we are to remove seats, what does that do to the inequity? If we follow what's being proposed right now, which is to remove one from everywhere, the numbers, I'm afraid, are pretty stark. And again, if these are not right, I've not created them, but they have been shared. The answer is that actually we go down to a position where, let's be honest, 2 of the St Helier districts are hit hardest. I know that certain members may be avoiding that. They may be talking in kind of broad general terms about inequity, but there are 2 districts that are hit hardest under P2. They would go to 3,644 members per seat and 3,358 public people per seat. However, the 2 most represented districts would be in very good positions. They would still have 1,995 people per seat and 1,881 per seat. In variance terms, against the average of 2,500, St Mary, St One and St Peter would be 37.3% above the variance, St John, St Lawrence and Trinity 29.5%, while St Helier South would be 23% under, St Helier North 29% under. What a Boundaries Commission may do is ask, is removing 1 person per seat the right way to achieve 9 senators? And the simple answer is no. If we assume that the number of senators is 9, because that's what the original proposition was seeking, notwithstanding Deputy Balash's concerns about the ambiguity that it doesn't say to reinstate 9 senators, we can even very quickly see there are more equitable systems under the current boundaries. And I'll be frank, the quickest and easiest place to see a deviation is the 2 most underrepresented districts and the 2 most overrepresented districts. If you take a further seat from St John, St Lawrence and Trinity, and a further seat from St Mary, St One and St Peter, you then start to achieve some equity. If you give those to St Helier South and you give it to St Helier North, you end up having no district representing with less than 2,000 people per head and no district with more than 3,000 people per head. Invariably, the variance is lower. You will still achieve senators. So members here who are saying, I'm hearing on the doorstep, I want senators. This is an amendment to bring back senators. It is one that says, let's do it slightly fairer. And I think the simple, huge discrepancy between St John, St Lawrence and Trinity, St Mary, St One and St Peter, and frankly, St Helier North and St Helier South should be a cause for everybody to ask themselves, is it right to take 1 from everybody, and whose equity is at stake in this? So I won't go on for too much longer. I think that this is a simple exercise, and I think if members want to be able to represent the island equitably with senators, if they want that, they need to make sure it's not 1 per seat, and that the right numbers, quite simply found, make their way through to the votes that members and the island have at the ballot box.
Do you have a point of clarification, Deputy Ozouf, or not? It was to speak. In that case, it's Deputy Iyer, then Deputy Ozouf. Deputy Iyer.
Thank you, sir. It has been mentioned by previous speakers that the Independent Boundaries Commission was voted for previously in this Assembly, and indeed in the report by Deputy Mezek, he says the State Assembly has already voted for the establishment of an Independent Boundaries Commission, and that, of course, is true. But there is a bit of a backstory to this. P139, it was a choice of voting for A, B or C. Now in Part B and Part C, the Boundaries Commission, the Independent Boundaries Commission was mentioned, but in the report attached to it, it was not mentioned once. And it also during the debate, it was not mentioned during the debate because everyone was concentrating very clearly on the amount of seats that were represented in each district, and people were concentrating on that primarily. So when it came to the vote, somebody asked the proposer, who was the chair of PPC at the time, whether he would take parts A, B and C separately so that we would have had the opportunity to have voted against the Boundaries Commission. But unfortunately, he insisted that we had to vote for all parts in one go. So a lot of members were caught between Scylla and Charybdis, whereby they could either vote to throw out the Boundaries Commission and thereby throwing out the current electoral system that we have, or voting the other way and causing more problems. So I thought it was important to mention that, especially for members who weren't there for the vote and they may not have understood the process of how we came to have an independent Boundaries Commission. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Ozouf.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. So I don't think I'm alone in being a little bit concerned about the way that we are making amendments and how they're going to actually impact in terms of this has got to be translated through to law. And if I may say, I do have a question for the Attorney General, sir, which I will refer to in my remarks, but he's happy to he may be able to consider the question I've got over lunch and adjournment. Yes. So I'm very concerned that any changes to the electoral system, as the mover of the proposition, this part 2 of Amendment 2, does, without transparency, legal scrutiny, which we're not doing here because that's got to come in the law that follows, and democratic legitimacy. The Chief Minister said earlier that, and I raised the question again, I don't know, and I'm not asking, this is not the question to the Attorney General, but I genuinely don't know. The Chief Minister said it can be done before the election, but that's not what the Venice Commission says. There's uncertainty at all stages until something is actually approved by the Privy Council and registered in the law court, sir. It can be challenged on ECHR grounds, on all sorts of grounds. It can be voted down, we can be amending it, we can amend the final law, the amendments at this stage. It's been often the case, sir, that this Assembly does not actually follow through on amendments that have previously been done, which is an expression of a desire to PPC to do something. So the matter of the electoral certainty of the electoral law, I would argue, sir, will only be certain when the law has been changed and it has been through the modalities and the proper processes of scrutiny. And I'm not sure that that is going to be possible within the Venice Convention arrangements. And I seek some guidance either from somebody of what the timings of whatever we do members of this Assembly will approve in terms of the timing of the legislation. I do not support, as I've said earlier, the rushed introduction of senators, but I do support the establishment, sir, of an independent Boundaries Commission. It was approved by the Assembly in 2020 to conduct a full and independent analysis. I would argue that the Commission is long overdue and it must be activated before we even contemplate any structural reform. To do so would be reckless. The Venice Commission of Code of Good Practice in Electoral Matters sets out clear principles, sir, one of which is that the fundamental changes to an electoral system should not take place within 12 months of an election unless there is broad political consensus, which I'm not sure there is, but we'll see on the final votes. If there is no such consensus, which as I imagine that there is, I don't see there is a clamouring. There may be lots of people listening online, sir, lots of them, I'm not sure. But I've door-knocked in St Saviour and asked my constituents what they think. And I didn't take this as any serious issue, but I do believe that the Electoral Boundaries Commission does actually represent expert opinion, which should be listened to. And we're basically, I said, putting a pin in a donkey, sir, we're basically guessing at a number of things which are fundamentally important to our Constitution, sir. And I'm concerned, and that's what I would like the Attorney General to kindly confirm, or otherwise, upon legal advice, that any legislation that will come forward as a result of these amended or unamended propositions, or the proposition itself, will require the primary law to have an ECHR certificate. I think that's going to be advised. The President of PPC, the Chairman of PPC, sorry, will bring that legislation if requested.
That's your question. So. The Attorney apparently is present online, and that's your question to him, is it?
It is going to be, but shall I finish my speech and then you can answer?
Of course, yes.
Yeah. The proposal to reintroduce senators, as originally set out, I think is violating the principles of the European Convention of Human Rights by reintroducing a malapportionment through without thorough analysis, which the Boundaries Commission would do. The rejection of the principal proposition has now created, and I'm not quite sure, I'm a bit confused about where we are, but I don't think I'm that confused about the importance of the Electoral Commission. If this amendment is passed and the core proposition fails, what is it that we are going to implement? I support the 2030 amendment by PPC. That seems manifestly sensible, although I don't think that we should be binding a future assembly after a general election to senators. That's my other issue. And I would ask for PPC to be advised of what are, and it might not be in this amendment, sir, it may be in a subsequent amendment, but what are, in the Attorney General's view, the convention rights under the Venice Commission Code, which the mover of this proposition quite rightly said, nothing to do with the European Union, it's Council of Europe, and I was a proud member of this assembly, sir, when we adopted ECHR as a fundamental part of that, and we had an excellent presentation by Professor Le Sueur, which I was pleased to listen to, and it's about human rights, and it's fundamental. They override everything, I would say, to the move of the original proposition. It's an international standard. It's got to be fixed, and it's fixed in our law. And ECHR matters whether we like it or not. We should be always challenged by the fundamental principles of human rights. And I think that that is really important. Professor Le Sueur said that politicians are less concerned with human rights now, as in those early heady days when we brought in the ECHR. I think we absolutely should be, sir. And Professor Le Sueur was quite right in his proposition. We should be, as politicians, activists in advancing human rights. And so and it's not a theoretical thing, if it is the case that we agree to any parts of this proposition, could it be subject to a judicial review? Could it be subject to a challenge at the Privy Council? And therefore not actually being, we've got a fixed term electoral system, we can't push the elections back, they're going to happen in June next year, they must. We can sort out whether it's Saturday or Sunday or Monday or Tuesday, whatever. And I'd be grateful if we could have some advice, sir, on these important points. I think it's essential, sir, that this Assembly understands the legal and constitutional consequences of adopting any of these amendments, and I'd be grateful. I'll be supporting the Boundaries Commission, sir, which is the subject of this one, but I don't want to have any legal uncertainty. I don't want to go into, send the direction, as the Chief Minister unwisely did, I think, we'll fix it before the election. Yeah, but when? Are we going to fix it 12 months? Because that's what the International Convention says. I don't know the answer to that question, but I doubt it can be done according to PPC. I think that it would be reckless, utterly reckless, sir. I'm not going to use any unparliamentary language, but it would be reckless for us to not abide by the principles that no legal change should be made to the electoral system without the checks and balances in place, one of which is the Boundaries Commission. Should have been done a long time ago. I agree with the move of this proposition. That's why I'll vote if it's just the Boundaries Commission, because I can't not vote against the Boundaries Commission. It's the right thing to do. It ensures compliance with international standards, fair voting, and all the rest of it. We've got a good system, I think, at the moment, sir. I quite like the Constable of St Mary and the Constable of St Helier. I've been a deputy of the Constable's parish, and I haven't been a deputy of St Mary, but I'm delighted that he's gone from deputy to constable. We've got all that sorted. They're fine. This assembly is good. I thought the last elections were jolly good, sir. They were a real test, not rotten barrel politics of the last bits where St Saviour had one district for a certain bit. We had 3 different districts, sir. Now the constable has got 1 district to deal with 5 deputies. Jolly good. It works quite well, I think. I hope the constable agrees. I want free and fair elections, sir. Proper process. That does mean not being a slave to the outcomes, but being expertly informed by experts. We should not seek to legislate, or rather in this context, promise legislation and then ask questions afterwards. It means that we should be proper principled and absolutely clear, legally sound, defensible, and free from any ambiguity. And I don't think that I'm being ambiguous in saying that the Independent Boundaries Commission isn't the only responsible mechanism to evaluate the questions that are before us in this underlying proposition, and actually in any proposition that changes the membership of this Assembly. If members are serious about democracy, sir, if they're really serious about democracy, transparency and legal certainty, then we should support this amendment, because only on the condition that it's implemented before 2030, which I think it does, it's the only credible way path. And I would ask the Attorney General to kindly bring this Assembly's knowledge up to date in the legal standing of whether or not the legislation that could pass, if anything was passed, be subject to a legal dispute, which I understood, because I was an election observer first, sir, will mark le jour international de la francophonie demain, Monsieur le Président de l'APF, je lui dis, and we're a bilingual assembly, sir, and we combine by international best practice, and international best practice is you have boundaries commissions, you don't do elections, you don't do legal changes before 12 months, and I'll leave it there, sir. Thank you.
Deputy, you identified a number of possible legal issues for advice from the attorney. Can I just let you know the three that I've written down to make sure that we've got your list of issues correct? First one, you want the attorney to advise on whether or not a human rights report will be required for the purpose of any amending legislation. I think, is that right?
That is indeed correct, sir. Thank you.
Secondly, I think you indicated you wanted an indication of what ECHR issues might be engaged by that legislation. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And thirdly, you wanted to know whether a judicial review of this proposition itself, if adopted, was possible. Is that the third issue?
Yes, sir. And judicial review in the matters of the case that we would bring legislation late, because the Chair of Privileges and Procedures has indicated that it's going to take time in order to bring this Assembly and our first, second and third reading. I know we do it quickly.
Also, if the legislation itself, if adopted, could be judicially reviewed.
I hope that's not a theoretical question that is ruled out of order, sir, because we're dealing with the reality of what we might be dealing with. And that would guide members as well as whether or not they would be capable of voting for the 2026, which is not possible, I don't think, but 2030 might be possible. Thank you, sir. It's good job, your lawyer, sir. It's very good, sir. Thank you.
All right. Deputy Scott, do you have a question to add to that?
Yes, please. And perhaps if the Deputy is happy just almost to start with this, because I think the bottom line is he's suggesting that this proposition is in breach of human rights legislation. So the question is it the unamended proposition in proposing what it's proposing?
I don't think he suggested that, but do you want advice on that?
I didn't say that, sir. I
didn't say that.
Oh, right. No. Oh, well, maybe we could just get that confirmation whilst we're at it. Thank you.
Right.
Just for point of clarification, I said that it's about the subsequent legislation.
Yes.
But
yes.
it
Right.
links to the underlying proposition as to whether or not we're giving false hope.
I think insofar as it doesn't have the further changes that have been mentioned.
Right. Yes, Deputy Tadia. Do you want to speak now?
Thank you, sir. So I was impressed by Deputy Alex Curtis's speech on this, which I thought was on point. And what I took out from that speech is that if you build the island-wide mandate, so if the island-wide mandate is to come back either now or in 2030, if we build it on an unsafe foundation, then it's very likely that the island-wide mandate won't stay in place. We must remind ourselves it was a relatively fragile thing to start with. It was introduced only in 1948, so out of all of the positions that have existed in the Assembly, I know that Deputy is only a title now, it's not quite the same role, but it's the senators were the new kids on the block. The island-wide mandate faced several iterations of change, both about the length of the term, about the elections, and ultimately the numbers of senators, and ultimately about them being in the Assembly at all. And I think that was inevitable for very, very many reasons. But if we are to bring them back, it's important that we do them on a firm foundation so that we're not chopping and changing all the time. And if a system is built on a foundation of fundamental unfairness, of making our system less equitable than it is already, and remember the starting point we had, as we know, is not one that's great. Certainly on paper it's not equitable, but it's one that many of us can live with, at least for the time being, because it is a finely tuned balance of tradition, of weighing up different parts of the community, and electoral norms, I think is more the point. Then we throw that away and we build something new on an unsafe foundation, which isn't wise. And I think that's why it's key that to forego all the both possible self-interest that we may have, or the alleged or perception of self-interest that we may have in this, because of course we know that I fully believe that we have a gerrymandered system, and that what we would have would effectively give rise to a system which could be said to be gerrymandered even further, which would advantage certain political groups. And of course, if we on our side of the Assembly were to impose changes that we want, we would also be accused of doing it for potentially party political gain, which wouldn't be the case, but it would be a reasonable thing for pundits to say. And I think that's why it's absolutely key that it gets taken out of the hands of politicians. The other point is that we've already, not we, but the Assembly has already voted for a Boundaries Commission. So the point is, why hasn't it been set up already? So the first thing that PPC need to do, irrespective of all this, is set up a Boundary Commission as it was charged to do. Consider whether or not actually the role of the Referendum Commission, whether or not a more general election commission, which could have a standing role, and a Boundary Commission could be one and the same for all of those things, so that it could constantly monitor and make recommendations about how to tweak our system. It's not going to, like I said, we've been told that the Referendum Commission already exists. They don't have a lot to do. This is in the same kind of ballpark, sir. And it comes back to the fact that there are problems about the current system. So let's not beat around the bush. Is that the inequities are obvious, but the way that we get to a solution is not so obvious. And we're not going to find that solution amongst ourselves. That's why we need an external body that can be considered on a basis of fairness, about first principles of democracy, about considerations, both local considerations about what's important for the electorate, respecting where possible our traditions, but also about international norms, about how you have fair, free and meaningful elections, because in fact voting systems also matter and distributions of seats also matter, sir. So, and these are not universally held principles. We presume that when we talk about principles of democracy and equity and voter equality, that these are all understood and then people will sign up to them. And in 2013, I had quite a rude awakening when I was actively taking part in a referendum on the different options. I look across to then, I think he was Senator Balash, and he was, I think, he was obviously involved with the Electoral Commission, which came up with various options. We know there were three options put to the electorate, and ultimately the option A and B were neck and neck in the polls. And I'll try and keep this factual, because there were different interpretations of the question that was put to the electorate. But ultimately, the two models, which had super constituencies similar to the districts we have now, with or without constables, were put to them. It was virtually tied, and then, of course, all the C votes, a lot of those votes, not all of them, because some people abstained in the second vote, went to give the majority to option B, which would have seen ultimately what we've got now in a different variation, deputies with constables in that place. And I remember campaigning, and it got to the last couple of days of the referendum. It was really difficult to get a handle on how the referendum was going to go, because we were getting quite a lot of traction in the option A group, which was an interesting coalition of islanders and political thinkers, members. And I remember going into town, and we were winning the argument quite widely were saying, we want a fair system, we want a simple system, everybody elected on the same mandate. And I remember in King Street coming up to a young person, somebody who I judged to be roughly my age, which would have been about early 30s at that point, and said, and they said, no, I'm voting for option B. And I said, how can you possibly vote for option B? It's not fair. They say, I don't care about fairness. I said, people in St Helier are not going to be represented properly. I don't want people in St Helier to have fair votes. Literally what I was told. I said, wow. So, okay, that's amazing. So you don't want a fair system. And I think that brings us back to the point, there are vested interests involved here. There are people in our system somewhere, I'm not going to attribute any improper motives to any states members, because we couldn't possibly have improper motives, but others elsewhere might well have improper motives for wanting to effectively gerrymander our system. Now, bringing back the senators in itself, as Deputy Mezek said, is not a problem mathematically, because everyone gets a fair vote. We know in our hearts of hearts, of course, it plays to the countryside, because countryside voters come out to vote for senators, but we can't object to that, because that's just democracy. One day the sleeping giant of St Helier may come out to vote in big numbers, again with the peripheral areas of and important areas of St Clement and St Saviour. And when they do, one better watch out, I would suggest, because change is a-coming. But in the meantime, we accept the system. If it's a fair system, you stand for election, whether you're as a party, as a shadow party, or as a true independent, and you take your chances, you get elected, and it's all done and dusted, even though there will be recriminations afterwards saying, but you've got too many people in your party. Yes, that's because we fielded candidates and they all got elected, or certainly the ones that got elected did. Try it sometime. It's a worthwhile experience. Other countries do it, I hear, and it's become quite established in other countries. But, you don't have to. That's the point. But what we do want is an equal basis for going forward. Otherwise, we will find ourselves perennially in this Groundhog Day. And we're always told, I think, about what we think people want. Well, I think actually we're not the best placed people to decide this. I don't think the public are necessarily the best placed unless they're given, ultimately, certainly in terms of the consideration. We have bodies that are considered to do this. Ultimately, when they're given something which is meaningful and sensible, I think the public are more than capable of actually saying, yes, this is what we would like. And in fact, they've done that, haven't they? They did that back in 2013. So exactly what are we trying to reinvent here? Well, I'll finish by saying what we're trying to reinvent is the fact that we have an inherently unfair system at the moment, which is becoming worse. If we look at actually the representation we've got throughout the districts, let's go through the table, because this needs to be said. So if you live, as I do, in fact, in the district of St Lawrence, St John and Trinity, we collectively have 7 representatives for that area, even though we've got the same population of the district that I represent, which is St Brelard. In St Brelard, my constituents only have 5 representatives. So there's already a disparity of 2. How can we as St Brelard representatives think that's fair? That the countryside gets more votes? And it gets worse, of course, because St Mary, St Peter and St Juan also have 7 representatives with their 4 deputies and 3 constables. So there's an inherent unfairness. And when we compare that to the 5 representatives that St Clement's have, so they've only got 1 constable in St Clement's as opposed to the 3 constables that the other areas have. So the anomaly, the gerrymander, if you like, is amplified because St Clement and St Brelard have 10 representatives, whereas the other 2 districts have 14. So we can see immediately where 2 districts with ostensibly the same populations, 14 representatives, 10 representatives. That's the problem that we have there. And of course, there'll be all sorts of semantics that say, but constables don't represent the districts. Irrespective of which way you cut it, those areas have 7 representatives. And I look at the Constable of St Helier, who I think has had is it a Damascene conversion? Is that the correct expression? I completely understand. He's a seasoned politician. It makes sense to perhaps not vote for amendments that ultimately are not going to change anything. Let's kick out the whole thing might be the what's going through his head. I can't speculate. But he is divided up into 3. So we talked about actually him having potentially 4.2 votes in a reformed assembly. But actually, when it comes to representation in the salami in St Helier, he's being salami sliced, if you like, or at least chopped in three. So he has to share himself between three constituencies, that of St Helier South, St Helier Central, and St Helier North. So the North gets 4 1/3 representatives, St Helier Central gets 5 1/3, and St Helier South gets 4 1/3. So the gerrymander continues. And of course, there will be members that, I've heard these arguments in the past, oh, but we should vote it, we should represent people on voter turnouts, not on the actual people that you represent. Imagine if we applied that, I'll go back to the rectors, imagine if we said that the dean doesn't have as many people coming to his church services as he used to maybe 100 years ago. Therefore, he should only be able to speak maybe once every 4 years rather than every other sitting. It gets into the world of, I think, fantasy, sir. So is there a problem here that needs to be resolved in terms of equity? Yes, absolutely, there is. Do we care not just about how we appear to the international community, but do we care about disenfranchising and disempowering certain parts of our population? Yes, absolutely we do. And I'll finish by paraphrasing perhaps Nelson Mandela. I know I look over to my new friend, Deputy Ozouf, and I'll speak in English if he doesn't mind. And so Nelson Mandela, I think, said, nobody is free unless everybody is free. And I would maybe paraphrase that and say that nobody can have electoral fairness unless everybody has electoral fairness. And we certainly don't have that in our system. And that's not sustainable, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. The next member to speak is Deputy Renouf.
Thank you, sir. The central point, it seems to me, of this amendment is that P2 is based to a significant degree on a false claim. And that claim is that bringing senators can be done without disturbing the improvements in voter equity that have been delivered, everyone acknowledges, by the current system. And Deputy Alex Curtis has, as is often the case, done us a service by doing the heavy lifting on this and explaining very clearly why that claim in P2 isn't the case, and therefore why a boundary commission is actually quite important. The proposer of P2 has airily said that it is a simple case of taking one deputy from each district and voter equity will not be worsened. But it will. It will. That's been factually proven. So I think there is a carelessness at the heart of P2. A casual declaration that is wrong. And that is, it seems to me, a perfect situation for where an amendment is called for. It's to bring a greater sense of rigour, a greater sense of clarity to a proposition. And that is what this amendment, it seems to me, does. And it strikes again at the heart of a fundamental principle. I've made clear what my view is about that fundamental principle already, so it won't be a surprise to anyone that I'll support it again. And the central point here is about respect, really, for all the people in Jersey. We should be heading in the right direction towards greater voter equity. That shows respect for everyone in Jersey. The problem about human rights and the ability of voters to express themselves is that a voter's ability under human rights law to express themselves is supposed to be equal. But under our system, a voter's ability to have their voice heard is different according to where they live. And under P2, it would get worse. That would get worse. And that is, in my view, wrong. So if we are going to have senators back, this is an amendment to ensure that it is done in a way which does the best we can with that system in terms of the fundamental principle at stake, which is voter equity. So the reasons for an independent boundary commission are because they are independent. They're independent. Independent of us, and as many people have already said, everyone in this assembly, given an opportunity to design an electoral system and boundaries, would come up with their own version. We need an independent recommendations or suggestions. They can come from us, they can come from PPC, that can be examined and see where the best solution lies. And it's also important because there is a clear issue that needs to be resolved. So we need somebody independent, an independent body. We need an issue to be resolved. And it is clear from the statement in the proposer's proposition that it is actually not easy to get to the objective of increased equity because it's so casually easy to get it wrong, as the proposer did. The Commission can consider various options, and then the final decision is, of course, will be up to this Assembly. So, in my view, this amendment is quite easy to support because it corrects a deficiency in the original proposition, stays true to principles of voter equity, and gives a mechanism by which to achieve all those goals.
Thank you. I note the time. Is the adjournment proposed?
Propose the adjournment.
Members content to adjourn? Adjourn till 2:15.